Like out of the front of your face.
It was. I have tried a lot of years to make that something. It's not been.
Test, test.
They have cheap.
Test, test.
We're good to go. I don't know if I'm transferring the stuff, but the RPA one is good.
Where is it?
It's in the stack.
Okay.
The drive.
Okay.
Yes. Absolutely.
Make some copies.
This one here.
Yeah. Okay. Say 8. All right.
Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So if you open it, it should have a new dark blue table. To be
Okay.
sure. Just to be sure.
All right. Let me
And we'll
get
print
it
it out.
down.
And that should help with avoidance argument.
So it's in the current stack materials file.
There we go.
Okay, so it looks different. So if I see that, it's just the presentation you want?
Just the presentation. That's right.
Whoever's here.
Aaron, you want me to do that, right? It's your-
Yeah, I need to do that.
Better steps. Better steps. Hey, Aaron, are we ready to go?
I think so, yeah.
Looks fine. Morning. This is STAC Meeting. We had called before to be in person. Here. So it appears that there's a lot of online. So I'll begin with Mr. Yelsey, by the way, it's chairman of the STAC. Also chairman of the Staff of Transportation and Planning Group. Dr. Cobb.
Yeah.
Dr. Cobb, here. Introduce yourself. Ron Patrick. You go to research, Doctor. Okay, Central Front. Central Front. Okay, Eastern DVR. Jeremy. Grand Valley.
Dana Brosig, Grand Valley MPO, and I'm joined with Rachel Peterson online also.
Okay, let's see. Gunnison Valley, I'm Vince Rialski and I'm chairman of the Gunnison Valley. I think there's some other people representing the Gunnison TBR. Roger.
Good morning, I'm here.
Okay,
We have.
and you are?
No.
This is Roger.
I'm not sure. Send her the link
You're
again.
typing.
Yeah, you just.
You represent.
Let me send it from my computer. Okay.
Intermountain. Brian Bennett with Intermountain. North Front Range.
Johnny Olson.
Northwest.
Heather Sloop, West TBR, and Brian Weeks with Bennett is online.
You're in the other end of the room. I'm looking for you.
I'm thinking the same thing. If I take your chair, Heather, I apologize.
Okay, Pike Peak area. Okay, Pueblo area.
Good morning, Eva Cosleon Paycog with Wendy Pettit.
South, San Luis Valley.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. This is Vern Hersink, chairman of the San Luis Valley TPR, and we also have Gene Glover, the co-chair or the vice chair of the San Luis Valley TPR.
Okay, South Central.
Brian, Wednesday, South Central, TPR.
Southeast. Southwest.
Heather Alvarez with the Southwest TPR.
Upper Front Range.
Devin Ross, Upper Front Range.
Southern U. Mountain. John Cater. I was gonna say Bill's here. Let's see, FTA. Most people sign on late. So. The first item on the agenda is approval of the May minutes for STAC. Is there a motion to approve?
Move to approve.
Second. Are there any corrections or additions? Hearing none. Is there anybody that disapproves of the approving the minutes? Hearing none, we'll consider the minutes for the May meeting approved. Moving on to the next item, see that update, Herman.
Yeah, makes sense. So just a couple of things. Status on the US 50 bridge down in between Denison and Montrose. We have our third public meeting on Tuesday. Doing some press tours down there. It'll be the first time anybody's been allowed on that folks. And of course, the contractors. We have a goal of doing 4 initial critical repairs by July 4th to get it moved into some traffic, and then hoping to get the more permanent repairs done sometime in October before the snow. So that's good progress I think we have on that.
So one of the things that I've heard is that when the bridge opens to one-way traffic, then the little Blue Creek will be done.
That's what we're pushing for, yes.
Okay, so that's the goal.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Last month, I think you all probably know, but to remind, the transportation committee did adopt some planning rules. They changed the rotation from chair and vice chair must be urban, rural, like that. They changed it to encourage, to give a little more flexibility to this body to decide who the chair and vice chair ought to be. There was some concern, I think, whether there would be enough willing takers to be able to have a rotation from urban to rural. So they wanted to just encourage that. And then they tabled the boundary changes. So we're still having some conversations. They tabled it until November, but I think we want to have an opportunity for some conversation about whether there's a legislative fix or something like that that would satisfy. So we're going to be working on that and more to come. This month, the TC agenda, because the Wednesday before the third Thursday, Juneteenth, and offices are closed. The commission will have a Thursday only meeting. They are going to tackle more conversations on P14. We are expecting them to take action on program distribution. So they had a workshop last month. We'll have a brief workshop on it this month. And then if all goes well, then we'll take action on those. That's the conversation you all had every month last year working on program distribution. So looking for the commission to take action on that. They will be hearing back from the nominating committee on who they would like to have as their next chair and vice chair. And that person would then become the chair July 1 and vice chair July 1. We'll give an update on the bridge, the US 50 bridge, and we'll have a long workshop about an hour on the goals. So those are due, I think, next month for that, and then we'll have a conversation about that and then probably action next month. So that's it for me, unless anybody has any questions.
Any questions of Herman?
Any word on? I know they interviewed a few people, but I haven't heard any. And also I have a meeting at 9, I'll be back after that, but I just want to let you know so it's not rude to them.
Go ahead, Johnny.
This change on this 1101, so you said there's going to be potential. And maybe that is.
We're not completely sure yet, but what the conversation and some of the public testimony we received is can be just added. I think that presents other issues and problems, but I think that was what the commission felt like would be a good answer to not have to split These would still give. In addition to the or I think that there's other issues, but that's.
Yeah, and because originally the number of TPR is legislated. So that you can only have 15. 10 rural, and 5 MPO. So to change that, you need the legislature to do something about it. That's what some people are hoping. Other questions?
Yeah, and just before we move on, will there be an opportunity for staff to consider that legislation before the November?
Sure. Yeah, so you can talk about issues, other issues. Brought up if that happened.
Yeah, it'd be nice to hear it beforehand. Otherwise, it'll end up being like it was where nobody heard it. 1101 was happening until after it already happened.
I'll promise we do that.
Other comments or questions?
Yeah, Heather said that just. Because I like the fact that the PPR.
I didn't hear what you said, but I'm curious now.
A couple months in advance would be great.
Yeah, I guess because I like to go back to PPR. And have that conversation.
Oh, and it would more than likely affect all of Region 3, so we'd all probably like to have our way in on.
Okay, moving on, Transportation Commission report. Now, Herman said that this month, they're only gonna have a Thursday meeting. Okay, so last month virtual. And virtual, okay. Okay. Last month, they had a number of things to talk about. One of the things they talked about their workshop was US 50 bridge and the closing of that bridge. First of all, the amount of money that they authorized initially they authorized 10 million, and then last month they approved 20 million altogether. That doesn't mean that that's what it's going to cost. It could be more than that. So that's something to consider. Some things on budgets, moving money here and there. And so there's notes in the packet for you to look at if you want. And then they talked about the statewide plan overview in terms of how they're going to proceed with statewide planning. A number of the things, goals, proposed goals, area advancing, transportation safety. Safety is becoming a big issue, this planning section, high performance roadways. And sustainability, increased transportation choice. It means increasing transit probably in terms of how people do it. There are a number of other issues they talk about too. There's a lot of discussion dealing with that. One of the things that we talked about also was PD 14. I think we're going to talk about that a little bit later today too. And all that was approved at the commission meeting, so the departments are approved, so we can move forward. In your packets are the actual numbers for dollars and the numbers will match consideration. Now, the county or municipality wants to have a consideration on what the match is. They have to write a letter, send it to me, and then this is for my $2,000. They send it to me, and then I bring it to the commission. The formulas are the same, basically. The 15%
goes to CDOT, 85% for local distribution, and then among that, you have a percentage split between MPOs and rural. One of the questions that's come up for that is, I think they call it free ride. There's some questions about how that's going to work, where people get free bus fare for the summer. And there's amount of money taken from the MMOF funding to fund that particular program. And the question that's come up is, what about those transit agencies that already allow free fare year round for everybody? Do they get a share in that money? Or does it all go to others? And so that's one of the questions that's come up. Herman talked about the 1101 process, and so the commission talked about that too. And so I think you've got all the information that I have that Herman gave out. In the regular meeting, there are a lot of public comments dealing with the split, Intermountain going to 2, and the southeast and south central coming together as 1. And so, as Herman says, they're looking for a decision from the legislature potentially. And there's nothing that I'm aware of that's in the works yet, but it could be. I think everything else was dealing with the resolutions. And so the resolutions are online if you want to see what the final resolutions are that commission approved. Okay, next questions. Yes, sir.
Vince, just to double check, we were discussing this yesterday, those MMF dollar allocation numbers that got approved, we're okay to start quote unquote allocating that or figuring out our formulas for allocation
Yes.
on that. We can bank on
Yes,
those
and
numbers.
it goes to 2028, I think, too.
Just wanting to make sure because we were wanting to get started on that planning. So
Yeah,
thank you,
so
sir.
you can't award, I mean, you can't award all the money to be spent in 25, but you could award money to be spent in the years in the future because of the money's coming in. But send out a call for projects. Yeah.
I have a question. So I know we're going to be discussing this a little later, and unfortunately I may not be able to participate in that piece, but is there something that as you guys discuss it later that we talk about? Is there a position that could be taken as a local government representative? I have concerns that that the legislature this year took the cut out of the local government portion of that MMOF instead of what was originally going to be out of other buckets to cover some of that free ride stuff. So I would like to see us be able to address that issue with the legislature, that while we understand it happened this year, we don't think it should be something that should happen continuously where they start cutting into local government shares. That 260 was really negotiated in good faith with local governments and folks from around the state. And I just like to see us make sure that we protect those terms of that negotiation.
So you talk about the MMOF?
That's correct.
Okay, so initially there was a off the top share going to CDOT. And the thing of it is we brought up all that notion in our summer meeting. And we talked about the fact that that money should be going back. And a portion of that, I think $3 million went back. But now there's some other ones that are getting taken out that I'm not real clear on as yet. What free ride was one of them, and there's a couple others, I think. And all of a sudden, it was a number, now it's gone down a little.
Yep, and I think that this body should be very sensitive to negotiations with the legislature to cut into some of the terms that were agreed to under 260.
Yeah. Okay, other questions? Okay, TPR reports. Let's start out with Dr. Cog. You're not a TPR, but you got a report due.
Yeah, this is Steve Odorizio. I have my lifeline, Ron Papsdorf, here in case he wants to supplement or add any changes. But at our May 15th meeting, we approved our 2050 regional transportation plan to include some project refinements and a new interchange on I-76 in Weld County. In addition, we also made some amendments to our 2024 to 25 Unified Planning Work Program, which is allowing us to update our scope and budget for greenhouse gas mitigation plan, as well as adding a new effort to develop a Vision Zero quick build toolkit for local governments. Third, we did our 2024 to 2027 TIP program updates, which included adding $127 million federal grant for Denver and RTD's Colfax rapid transit, bus rapid transit project. And then finally, we received a briefing from our regional housing needs assessment and DRCOG's next step towards developing a regional housing strategy as we continue to address housing as an issue in DRCOG. We're starting to see a lot of these issues merge that used to be in their own lane. And we're seeing housing and transportation and all these issues starting to merge. And so we're taking on a lot of these issues holistically and trying to work collaboratively to address them. Anything else, Ron? All right, that's it.
Okay, Central Front Range.
Good morning, Vince. This is Dick Elsner. Sorry I couldn't get there this morning, but they had a head-on 285, which closed the road. I think it happened at 3 o'clock this morning, and the road was really a mess. Anyway, as far as the Central Front Range, we do have that project in Fairplay that is going on. I am really hopeful that CDOT learned something from the way they did that, and we'll work with our contractors a little bit better and understand that it is never a good idea to change lane alignment the Friday before Memorial Day. They did it wrong initially. They did correct it, but I'd be more than happy to forward all the phone calls I got. Anyway,
so are you talking about the intersection of Poncha Springs and
no, I'm talking about the one in Fairplay.
Oh, Fairplay. Okay.
Yeah, they switched. They opened up the new bridge so they could finish tearing apart the old bridge, but they had the left turn and straight through in the same lane to turn onto Colorado 9, and it was an absolute disaster until they figured out that the design was to use a different lane for straight through and one for left turn. So anyway, CDOT, I appreciate their quick fix, but they really need to not do anything in the mountains around a major holiday that's different, because it is a mess up there. Other than that, I'm hoping maybe Samantha has some things going on and the rest of it, but we're into construction season. Be careful out there and watch for the workers.
Okay, thanks, Dick. Eastern TPR.
Yeah, we had our meeting Monday and got updates on the construction. We have one project that's wrapped up already that was started for some repaving on Highway 71 that wrapped up. We have I-70 and I-76 projects and a few others moving forward. Glad to see those moving. We always need to get more scheduled, but glad to have the ones going that we have. One of the issues that just wanted to mention was getting concrete in the rural areas is getting more and more difficult. And one project they're having now is actually using one of those new on-site trucks that mixes it on site, because we are having trouble having local concrete people meet the specs for CDOT. So that's continuing to drive up the costs, along with not having asphalt readily available in the rural areas. It would be nice if CDOT could use our small business development and things to try to help get some of those infrastructure things for even the communities back into the rural areas with asphalt and concrete, and help support those so that we can keep them in the rural areas, because we've seen them kind of dry up and move away from the government contracts because of the specs and requirements they have on them. So anything federal and state can do to try to help encourage the small business asphalt and concrete work into rural areas, it would help the local communities also for house construction and all the other things. So, and the towns that they need. So the Lincoln County, I know, is working on a bridge project and they're worrying about being able to get the concrete to redo the deck that they've gotten funding to help do. So, or anything CDOT can do, and even the federal requirements would be beneficial. We also were made aware of FEMA is coming out and encouraging a lot of counties and communities to do updates to their base level engineering for floodplains. And the tool they're using is not actually including any of the state highway infrastructure or county road stuff when they look at those floodplains. So they're not looking at restrictions that roadways and things can cause to the floodplain. So they're doing this, and then you have to the communities and things then have to spend a bunch more money and basically redo it all because they're not including some of those structures. And so that was made aware to the counties and things to be cautious of what FEMA is coming out and pushing, because the design or the mapping and stuff that they're doing is not really accurate for mapping floodplains, and it's adding large areas, thousands of miles to floodplains that are not accurate. So they were cautioning counties and people to be of doing that base level, that they're using that tool, that tool is not accurate. So talked about winter maintenance. People always are asking, why are the trucks out putting down stuff before winter storms? And they kind of explain that so that commissioners and the representatives in the TPR can help explain it to the public, that they're out there in advance to prevent the icing of the highways and to help get the highways back to good condition as quickly as possible after the storm. So that was good to have. And we talked about multimodal option funds and getting those funds, starting to look at prioritizing projects for that. So I think that covers our TPR. Thank you.
Grand Valley.
All right, so we had a great groundbreaking yesterday for our fleet maintenance facility, and want to thank FTA folks for coming out from the Denver area for that. We also are making good progress on our safety action plan as well as our long range plan. And then finally, we had our UPWP midterm review a couple weeks ago, and that also went well. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Gunnison Valley. The big thing in Gunnison Valley is the bridge, Highway 50 bridge. You know, you don't really think about it, but when you cut that bridge off, you're really separating the western slope from the at least our part of the western slope in half. The thing of it is you can't get there from here without that bridge. Now, the county took a county road that went from 149 over to 50 on the other side of the bridge and redid it, hauled in with CDOT help, hauled in all kinds of gravel and redid the road, and then added a pilot car, one direction, 7 times a day. So you go over one side, come back on the other side. And so they're trying to keep the roadway down to 1 lane service, because that's the only road that sort of is available. And so one of the things I really do have to do is give credit to CDOT for all the communication that they're really putting out in terms of what's happening, what the problem is, when do they think it's going to get fixed? Because all of those meetings, the public meetings, are really answering the public's questions, and we've seen less of an uproar. The volume of complaints is really low compared to what it was with the Little Brew Creek Canyon. And so people are getting through, commercial trucks are getting through on County Road 26 from 50 west of the bridge to 50 east of the bridge. And so everybody's sort of satisfied. Now, Kebler Pass is now open also. County Road 26 is only 15 miles. Kebler Pass is 30 miles. Kebler Passes do not have pilot cars guiding people over and back. And so people that there are flaggers on each end trying to make sure that the people really need to use that road to go over, and trying to get this stuff squared away. There's another meeting on June 11th, public meeting, hybrid. You can be in person or have it on the computer. Now, one of the other things that our area is involved with is county meetings. Our county TPR is made up of 6 counties, and we've got 4 of them already completed in terms of the county meetings with the various regions. Now, Gunnison Valley TPR is made up of 2 regions, Region 3 and Region 5. So there are 2 counties that are in Region 5 and 4 counties in Region 3. And so we have some coordination to get through there. So we got 2 meetings left, Gunnison and San Miguel County. It's interesting that the people are participating and the county commissioners are really asking appropriate questions, and everybody's getting ready for the planning process, and actually, doing some things ahead of time. And so we hope that the process goes well and fairly fast, beginning this summer. There's a lot of other projects that are underway, and some finishing, some being started, and hopefully that those will all be taken care of. Questions about the Bridge 50? I've been attending 2 meetings a week about just that fact. And so it gets a little troublesome in terms of making sure that all the mission is done. The inspections are all done. The repair materials on order should be delivered this week. And then they'll be drilling a lot of holes in this T1 steel, and fashioning repair plates over each of the wells, even those that aren't appear to be cracked, but they might have some voids in them. And so they're reassuring that the strength of the bridge is right up there. Part of the problem with the bridge, if you start adding all this extra steel, is going to add a lot of weight to the bridge, the dead weight. And so they're probably going to be taking a layer of surface off of the bridge to reduce the weight so the bridge can still hold up to the regular loads. Okay, Intermountain.
Great. Thank you, Vince. Our next meeting is in July. It'll be at the second retreat we're going to have just to talk about relationships and set our goals for setting priorities. We did stop our governing documents until November. We just didn't want to go forward with an IGA and then have to rework that if we needed to. So that whole process stopped. But from a statewide significance standpoint, we were involved in setting the protocol for closure of Glenwood Canyon during times of whether there's a flash flood watch or a flash flood warning. So our friends in Northwest can get a little more traffic up there in case they want a little more boost to their economy. But basically, it's a flash flood warning that will close Glenwood Canyon from Glenwood Springs to Dot Zero. There'll be pre-warning starting in Utah at the Utah line, and then also at the Wolcott exit. So anytime there's a flash flood warning, the highway will be closed. If there's a flash flood watch, the rest area will be closed and the bike path will be closed. So that's the protocol just from a public safety standpoint, well, what will happen this summer with Glenwood Canyon. But with that, that's it. Thanks, Vince.
So one of the things to remember is when I-70 gets closed, the detour is Highway 50. That detour, well, and 40, yeah.
I think most people go around the north way and also through Cottonwood Pass. So Eagle County will be notified on the closure, And they'll be manning Cottonwood Pass for most of the vehicular traffic.
Right, so 50 is not available to take that as a detour this time.
Yeah.
Not for about a month or two. Okay, North Front Range. Forget who you are?
No, I was doing something else and lost my cheat sheet. Johnny Olson, North Front Range. At the May 2nd Planning Council meeting, we adopted our 2025 budget and task for the 2024-2025 UPWP. As you all know, we're losing Suzette. I think John last month talked a little bit about Suzette and that she's going to be done at the end of August. It crushes me. I've been working with Suzette for a long time. And if I was here last month, I'd have made her cry if she didn't cry. And I'd have made y'all give her a standing ovation. She's been part of the North Front Range MPO for a lot of years, very important to transportation. The good news is we had three good candidates we interviewed last month. We did select a new executive director. His name is Paul Sizemore. He currently is the Director of Community Development and Neighborhood Services with the City of Fort Collins. So his first day will be in July. So we're looking for good things. I always talk about you can't replace anybody, right? You're just bringing in somebody new because you can't replace a superstar like Suzette. So Paul's got some big shoes to fill and we look forward to watching him do that. Also this last month, we had the groundbreaking for segment 5. And I want to thank Shaylin Batt, the administrator from FHWA. He was there. CDOT did a wonderful job. It was, I started sort of dabbling in I-25 in 1993 when the first MIS was done through the 7th pot. Anybody remember the 7th pot? We don't use that word much anymore. Thank God. 7th pot. Yep. There you go.
If we're going to have it again, it'll be a 6th spot.
Or an 8th. So we had that. It was a wonderful event. CDOT did a wonderful job. Pretty emotional for someone like me that's been on that corridor for so long to finally see that last segment get 3 lanes. Still a lot more work to do with segments 2, 3, and 4, but it was a good event and exciting event. And Mr. Cater was there, and there was a lot of great dignitaries there that day, and so I wanted to thank them for that.
Okay, Northwest TPR.
We have not had a meeting since our May STAC, but construction is ongoing throughout Northwest TPR. Our larger projects on our priority list, that being the passing lanes from Kremling to Muddy Pass that have been on our priority list, have started. So that's very exciting for our TPR. We also have a very large concrete reconstruction throughout downtown Steamboat. And I know we're buttoning up some projects in Moffett County and starting projects on the Hamilton side of that highway. We have had all of our county meetings. So that is done within our TPR, and all of the counties have their marching orders to get their priority projects done, as well as for their municipalities to do that. So we will convene in July, at the end of July, and have that initial discussion on priority project planning. We are very concerned with Mr. Pettit's flash flood or Glenwood Canyon closing and having that traffic come to us. As much as it is a revenue generator, it is also a very huge detriment to the 40 corridor, especially with the 50 being closed, and we cannot ask and express to CDOT more than we have, that 80 needs to be the consideration and not have all that traffic come up our way. We, especially with the construction projects that are happening currently, floods are going to happen at the next month, and the downtown 40 construction and passing lane construction on 40 will devastate our entire region in a way that is not positive. Their truckers, people aren't going to stop. They're going to just get mad. So nobody likes a mad tourist. Anyway, other than that, we're set to go for July, and we will be reviewing our governing docs as well, probably briefly in July, and then hopefully have a vote and kind of redistribution of how things work up in Northwest TPR in the October or fall meeting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Vince, if I
Yes.
could just, I know the protocol has all this involved agencies on notice, but I wonder, Heather, if there ought to be a call to you all up there, like, okay, so.
You can call me.
Well, well, yeah, we can, well, just to notify people that, hey, traffic's coming.
Yeah.
So
That
that would,
would be
I mean, I can do that. I could do that with you, or we
Yeah,
can,
and then-
okay.
Thank you. Okay, Pikes Peak.
Hi, Vince. My apologies for not being on sooner. I had a little technical difficulty this morning. The report for Pikes Peak is, we're happy to announce, and again, through our Region 2 Director Shane Ferguson, we were told that they did receive a notice to proceed on the Airport and Towers Interchange project yesterday. And that was the PPACG #1 priority for the CDOT 10-year program. So we're very excited that project is going to be moving forward. Then my only other item is I do want to say thanks Shane and all of his staff in Region 2 as they spent Tuesday of this week cleaning up trash along the corridors. I believe it's the third year that they've had the Region 2 staff do that event. And again, just shows how great a community partner Shane and his staff are with everyone in the region. So again, thanks to CDOT and Shane for cleaning up and making everything look a little more shiny for America's Mountain. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Pueblo area.
Good morning. So we adopted our 25 to 28 TIP, and we also had our mid-year UPWP review, which went really well. CDOT has started a large resurfacing project through I-25, and that'll be nice to have nice smooth surface going through our city. And I-25 and US 50B interchange, hopefully planning on advertisement later on this summer. That's it for us.
Thank you. Okay, San Luis Valley.
Yeah, good morning again, everybody. Vern Hersink, San Luis Valley TPR. We met on the 23rd of May and we heard the standard updates on maintenance and construction. We're looking forward to the planning process for our upcoming priorities, and we adopted our new bylaws. So we're honky-dory about that. End of report.
Thank you. South Central.
Okay, our next TPR meeting is going to be July 25th. Currently, the biggest project we have going on in our region is the bridge replacement at southbound I-25 in Walsenburg. And they just started pouring the deck on the, or concrete on the deck. So that's all I have.
Thanks. Southeast.
We're working diligently on addressing HB 1101 boundary issues with our legislative reps, coordinating with Region 2 to complete our county meetings. Working on our website update is almost complete and will be going live in June. And our next meeting is in July.
Hey, Southwest.
Hi, our next meeting is next week on June 13th, but we do have a couple of projects underway, one of which includes finishing up the fiber installation on the west side of Wolf Creek Pass from the summit down to Pagosa. And another large one is the realignment of US 550 directly into the US 160 interchange to kind of eliminate a problem grade on Farmington Hill down here. So, but other than that, we haven't had a meeting since the last STAC meeting.
Thank you. Upper Front Range.
Not a lot to report. Want to again thank Dr. Cog on our interchange. I know that's a joint boundary there, so appreciate your support towards that. We have our meeting today, so we'll have a better update the next STAC.
Good, thanks. Southern Ute. Okay, Ute Mountain. John.
Thank you, Vince. Just a few things from Federal Highway. You know, as you're all aware, we have all these grant opportunities out there these days. And one that I'd like to highlight is the Safe Streets for All program. It's one that's available for planning studies and capital grants, but especially the planning studies are available for local governments. And it's pretty much, there's more money there than we have applicants. So if you've got local governments you're aware of that want to do a planning study, want to do some sort of a planning look in your community, I really encourage you to apply for the Safe Routes for School program because I misspoke. Yeah, well, that's a great program too. But Safe Streets for All, Safe Streets for All is the program, and it's the next grant cycle. It closes in end of August, so it's got a little bit of time to get your application in. But there's a lot of opportunities there. And we've had many communities across Colorado successful already, large and small, get those. But if it's something you've thought about, if you got something you'd like to tackle, I'd really encourage you to apply for those. If you've got questions, contact my office, Bill or I, or Jin Hugh, if you happen to know her, and we can get you started on that. So I really encourage you to do that. The other thing, safety-wise, I want to talk about is real quick is proven safety countermeasures. That's something that Federal Highway has been promoting. And there are 28 things that you can do. Proven safety countermeasure. These are things that have worked across the country that are examples of things that can get significant reduction in accidents and crashes in your communities. And some of them are big, some of them are small. Most of them are pretty small. Things like median barriers, things like back plates on signals, things like bike lanes, things like roundabouts, things like lighting at problem areas. I mean, there's a lot of things that are relatively simple, relatively low budget, but can make a big difference safety-wise if you got areas with issues. So just want to, if you got an area that you're kind of struggling with, I encourage you to Google FHWA safety countermeasures or proven safety countermeasures, and the list is there. And again, contacts if you need more information, but I think a lot of them are pretty self-explanatory, but just kind of give you that menu of things to try or things to look at if you've got safety concerns. So that's it.
On the safety stuff, do they talk about at all overuse of safety things such as the pylons that confuse traffic with like lanes and things? Because I mean,
everything needs to be used appropriately, right? And you can definitely overdo things. I think that's something to always have in your mind when you're looking at improvements. Yeah, you can overdo things. You can make things so confusing that people don't understand how to navigate and that type of thing. But not explicitly. But good reminder for everybody. Yeah.
And then the grants that are available.
There are two types. There are planning grants and there's implementation grants. Okay. The planning grants, there's more money there than we got applicants. The implementation grants is the opposite. There's a lot of applicants there and it's pretty competitive. Yeah, and to get one of those implementation grants, you have to have done a planning study first. Yeah.
Thanks, John. Do you know if TPRs would be eligible applicants and recipients for the Safe Streets and Roads for All grants?
I would think so. I mean, to do a study. Yeah.
So I wonder if TPRs that have not allocated their multimodal options fund monies yet, that state money could be used to provide the non-federal match for the Safe Streets and Roads for All to leverage if you want to consider that. Obviously, that's a decision of your TPR. We did as an agency just submit a regional application for Safe Streets for All for a suite of implementation projects across the region. And even as an MPO, our struggle was coming up with the non-federal match for the funds. So we had to work with a lot of different local jurisdictions for them to all agree to contribute local money because we had already allocated our multimodal options fund money. But for TPRs, you might consider whether you might want to tap into that if you haven't already allocated as a source for the match for these grants.
Thank you. Somebody here from FTA. Did I miss anybody else? Okay, legislative. I see Jamie's here.
I'm also here as well. I'm just on video. Apologies for being on my phone as well. My internet just completely went out. Thank you all for all your help this past legislative session. As you all know, we just wrapped up in May, and the governor is about to finish his bill signing tour. And so from a CDOT legislative priority perspective, we just have had all of our bills signed as of yesterday. We had our final bill signings with the governor at the mansion for SB 65, which was our distracted driving bill, which created a hands-free law in Colorado, as well as SB 195, which was the kind of joint bill that had our speed camera provisions, as well as a carve out for vulnerable road user projects out of faster safety to support vulnerable road users. And that was signed as well. And so both of those bills are now law, and we can begin implementation, as well as implementation plans around the plethora of other bills we saw this year. Currently working on a very broad document that will be finalized before the next TC meeting to circulate, that will have CDOT's obligations for every bill that we saw this year. It's been a little bit of a lift to put that together because it was such a big transportation year. But overall, we ended up in a really good spot. It was a historic year for transportation, especially for transit funding. And so we're excited to get to work and calculate our implementation plans around all of these bills. And then we expect to see a lot of movement this year. You know, of course, it's an election year. A lot of legislators are termed out that have been staples in the legislature for a long time. So it'll be a very different composition next year. And so starting to look to, you know, what our legislative priorities will be next year. We don't have anything identified yet. And so we'll definitely keep you guys in the loop as those materialize. And then I just also wanted to address Commissioner Odorizio's question, I believe, about MMOF funding and the transit program. And so that is correct that SB 32 did take a one-time appropriation from MMOF to fund the zero transit fare programs. I do want to be clear that we were very adamant that we would not support a recurring appropriation from that fund to support the zero fare programs. It did seem like an appropriate choice for one time because just because it took a few years for that money to build up before we started allocating it, and because it's being drawn so slowly, there was an opportunity for a one-time appropriation that would not result in a cancellation of any projects. But we were clear on every single negotiation that this would not be the final funding source. It was just a kind of a one-time fix given the financial limitations this year out of general fund, and that it was a big priority for the legislature. And so it was something they wanted to move forward with. But now that we have additional transit funding as well, I think that there's more conversations to be had this summer about if those programs move forward past the timeline in the bill, what the funding source will be. And I don't think we would support MMOF being the funding source. But happy to answer any further questions on that too. Hopefully that gives us a little bit of clarity. It was, I'll say too, it was $10 million. So it was $5 million to RTD, $5 million to CASTA for the implementation for smaller transit agencies. And they have a choice to participate in one or the other program. We didn't have enough funding for two robust programs. So basically transit agencies have the opportunity to participate in one or the other program.
So one of the questions that I've had from other people is the fact that the funding, the transit agencies that already supply zero fares year round aren't getting any of this money.
Which transit agencies are those ones?
Well, I know, first of all, in Gunnison, the RTA in Gunnison provided years ago a tax to provide free fare for everybody going up and down the valley. And so those people like that. I'm not sure which other ones do, but I know there are others that do that. And so all of a
Steamboat's
sudden,
free.
pardon me?
Steamboat is free.
Steamboat. So the thing of it is they're losing out on this extra money because they're already free fare.
Yeah, that's not something that has come up in my discussions about it. This was a bill that we supported how we could. It did originate from the legislature though, and the TLRCs. But if we want to connect on that more offline, I'm happy to. But I don't know if there's anyone else in the room to kind of speak to that. But I'm sure that sounds like something that I think has probably come up in past years too with the origination of the program. So I understand those concerns. But happy to talk more about that too.
Okay. Ron. Get the sign thing.
Thank you, Emily. I appreciate that perspective, and I appreciate CDOT relaying to the legislature about this not being a recurring sort of issue and recurring reduction of MMOF funds, and I think that's appropriate. And shame on us for not tracking closely enough on the bill as it progressed through the Appropriations Committee to understand that shift in the funding source from state general fund to local MMOF. However, I will say, hearing you state that you were involved in those negotiations, and certainly not your responsibility to inform the local agencies or STAC about that conversation happening in the legislature. Again, shame on us for not tracking on it. But I think it would have been, in hindsight, appropriate for CDOT to inform STAC that change had happened or was happening or was under consideration. And just so everyone understands, this change resulted in basically about a $6 million reduction in what would have come to DRCOG under the updated MMOF distribution formula, and 5 million is coming back to RTD. So basically $1 million of MMOF money from the Denver region is now being distributed to the rest of the state. You're welcome.
Thank you. Okay, Steve.
Thank you, Emily. I appreciate that update and the explanation. What happens though is that local governments really negotiated really in good faith on 260. And this seems to be a pattern of the state government, whether it's the agencies or the legislators coming in, negotiating something, and then later on further negotiating for us to have an allocation or some discretionary spending. That's negotiating in good faith. We all stuck our neck out on 260. And then just within a couple of years later, they come back and they start whittling away at our discretion. This is a pattern that has continued, not just in the context of transportation, but across the board. And local governments are getting more and more weary about entering into agreements and negotiating in good faith with folks who can later on do a bait and switch. And so while you are in no way the fault on this, and I want to make sure that that's clear, because I think you're very effective and you're good at what you do. I'm concerned at the other things as we continue to negotiate in good faith and support things like the new fee on the oil and gas and other things where there was an allocation and there were some things that were agreed to that later on those don't become other areas of discretion or buckets of money that get raided quietly or quickly by the legislature and the agencies working out a deal. And that's what I think is important, is that we need to restore trust in local and state governments to work with each other, negotiate in good faith, and admit and adhere to those agreements that were agreed to. And I'm just more concerned at the big picture, the lack of transparency, and the overall trust issues that we continue to have and whittle away at. So if we can all work together to be sensitive to those, because we've had some big, you were right, a lot of big stuff happened this year in transportation at the legislature, but we need to hold to those agreements and those negotiations that occurred this year and not let someone go back and whittle away at those. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions, comments for Emily? Excuse me.
If I could just chime in too, I do just want to mention that I have mentioned this in the past in these meetings, as well as brought them up in our TC meetings, as well as put them on our documents that we've sent out to STAC. And so I do want to say that we have taken a good faith effort to communicate this as much as we could, but if there is any additional measures that we can take to communicate that, I would happily, talk to everyone about how we can continue to communicate them. Of course, it is just a tricky piece with the legislature moving so quickly that we can do our best. But yeah, I do want to mention that this was also something that the legislature took on as well, and it wasn't just something coming from CDOT. This was something, there was not general fund this year, and it was a very popular program, and so they wanted to find a solution that made sense. And so Ron, I also hear you on that. I do want to get with you if possible to kind of understand the ways that it's impacted DRCOG a little bit deeper. If you'd like to connect offline, I'd love to kind of dig into that as well.
Okay, I think Dana online has a question.
Yeah, I think maybe, I don't know if the bill was mentioned in the legislative update, but I don't think there was any talk about it impacting MMOF funds. And I think that's where there was a lack of transparency and there were some bills also that weren't on the legislative update that we found that just from our own digging. So I think it would be helpful to be clear what is being included and what is not being included, and how much we need to dig into it, because it is a lot, to try to understand every single bill and be able to advocate for ourselves. I'll just say pretty much all of the mountain transit systems are fare free. So there's actually a lot of transit systems in the state that are fare free. Some, I think last time were able to get some funding by doing some expansion routes, pilot projects, but otherwise I think they're not eligible. And I think the other thing that bothered me is that this was going on behind the scenes with MMOF while we were talking about MMOF distribution with the TC, so the conversation was being had about MMOF fees, but this whole part of it, of them taking 6 million out of the local distribution, was not mentioned at all in those discussions. And I think that should have been spoken about so that we were aware, because we would have, it doesn't impact us. We can apply for fare free. We have in the past. We might even get more money, but I think it's just the way that it was done is maybe not equitable. So
thanks for your feedback on that.
Kevin.
Thank you, Vince. Dana, well said. And Emily, I'll start off saying you do an excellent job on behalf of CDOT and whatnot. But I want to give a harumph to my fellow commissioner that just spoke a moment ago on behalf of DRCOG. These things are being negotiated in good faith, and too often, you go back to 260. This is all the money we'll ever need, right? That's what CDOT claimed. And now we keep diving into it and pilfering those coffers for this project or that project. The money keeps getting shifted from where it was intended to go. I have zero faith at this moment that the $150 million in wealth that is now going to be getting transferred annually out of my county, being Weld County, being on the back of oil and gas towards a choo-choo train, will continue to stay there, right? Because they'll find another use for it and pilfer that money for something else. And then we'll need to come and get additional funds to make this choo-choo train a reality, because it's been long promised. We just had a joint meeting with Boulder County. And if you can just reference that, that's Weld and Boulder County coming together to have a joint meeting on things that might address together. And Boulder's sitting there going, we've been told for decades, we're going to get a train, we're going to get transit to our county, to our municipality, and that money keeps getting pushed aside for other projects. And it goes to that good faith statement, Steve, that you made just a moment ago. People are negotiating so that stuff gets done. And that only lasts about as long as the session lasts. And as soon as we're on to the next year, it goes away. So my confidence isn't there. And I think it's time we start holding things more accountable, or at least reminding people of the promises made. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions or comments for Emily? Oh, Johnny.
So there's been a lot of great comments, and I think CDOT works hard for us, knowing how the locals and the staff work and how we want to move things forward. I don't know if this is out of line, but I'm going to ask, but I don't know. Commissioner Odoricio and Commissioner Ross and others have said it really well, so I'm not going to expand on it, but maybe we need to, I don't know if it has weight. Maybe we as a STAC need to write a letter to CDOT and copy our legislatures and let them know exactly how we feel, because these smoky backroom deals affect us, who they represent. And I don't know if STAC we should all get on board, take a vote to maybe write a letter of disdain, or I can't say disgust, or whatever word we want to use, of the lack of transparency and how it is affecting our local communities by these deals being made. There's plenty of general fund money. They could have taken it out of general fund. It's a great initiative, fine, make it free, but don't take it from the pot of money that was given to transportation to help us improve our systems and improve our own local stuff through MMOF. So I would recommend maybe we do a letter from the STAC.
Heather.
I am not gonna reiterate everything our friendly friends have said. I will say that in this entire mix, and I agree with you, Johnny, I think that a letter would be fantastic. I think in the entire mix of how things are coming to play, there is a general feeling, in a sense, at least from what I'm hearing from all of you, is STAC seems to is becoming more insignificant as we continue to move forward. And so how do we as a STAC collectively have our voice heard again and make sure that it is unified and direct in where our intentions are going? So I'm with you on whatever you'd like to do. As vice chair, I'm fully in support of that, because I think in all reality, not only from a CDOT perspective, but through the lines of how we act through TC, but also how we act with the legislature would be very helpful, because unfortunately, it does feel like we are the, I hate to say this, the redheaded stepchild of CDOT, and we shouldn't be. We are part of this legislative action, and we need to be part of the acting instead of being part of the being told. So I'm all for however you all want to proceed.
Gary.
Yeah, the MMOF kind of brings up the old one that's been going on for decades, is the off the top out of our HUTF for public safety. It's continuing to eat away into the city, county, and state funding from HUTF. So I think there's some issues that would be good to bring probably to the TLRC as STAC. I would ask that STAC representatives be, or at least our chair and vice chair, be asked to participate in the TLRC meetings through the summer, so that we can give our feedback from the local communities throughout the state on issues that we see for transportation. So I guess that would be a request, that we make sure our STAC representatives are encouraged to participate in the TLRC meetings this summer.
Do you go to those, Vince?
No.
I've never been invited to one.
Not unless I'm requested.
I've never been invited to one.
So
Johnny,
I'm going to add on to Gary. One of the things I've learned in transportation is you're always better as a group than as individuals. So if we had a letter and talking points of all the things that we're talking about, and they do show up, because TLRC does move around and goes to other communities, and they go out and they'll be in Eastern, Western. Now it might be single meeting or whatever, but getting on that list. But if we had those talking points as individual communities and we all pounded that same ground, instead of us being individuals asking for what we need, but maybe let's fix the bigger picture, and then that'll help us fix the smaller day-to-day things that we're talking about. And that's why I think that letter would be strong, and like talk about some of the issues that are driving transportation issues in local roads and also statewide roads. It's just not us. It's affecting CDOT too, right? I mean, CDOT, that's $6 million that somebody at CDOT wouldn't get to be able to distribute or do their work neither. So it's not just us. but we're stronger together than we are as individuals. And I think having a letter with some bullets that when they do show up or your legislator shows up, everybody's talking from the same sheet of music.
And I would just add, I like the letter idea a lot. I just wonder what that next step could be from an interaction standpoint. You know, are we requesting something other than just a complaint letter? You know, what would that next step be from a collaboration standpoint?
Steve.
I think Brian hit the nail on the head, is that the tone and the content of the letter is the most important thing that we could do. Is our role at STAC, from what I understand, and I know I'm fairly new representing Dr. Cog on this board, but I will say that it's my understanding that our role is in nature, and I think we can point out issues and ask that there be transparency and inclusivity when such situations in the future might trigger changes to pre-existing negotiated terms or allocations or budget changes, funding changes. I think that's fair for us to ask. We can do it where the tone of the letter doesn't have to be, it could still be based on fact and firm, but still in a tone that allows us to stay at the table. What I don't want to do, from what I understand, is always just have complaints, and that will further isolate STAC in the future as just being a complaining body. And I think if we can do it in a productive manner, we'll probably be more successful in trying to get the point across that we ask that that existing negotiated terms and agreements are held to high regard, and that we go through very specific, careful deliberation, inclusive deliberation and discussions anytime that is proposed to change. And if it might mean we ask legislature and staff at CDOT to interact with locals and our management organizations, TPRs, then we do that. And I think that it allows us to have more of what democracy is all designed to be, which is an inclusive, deliberative process. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments for Emily?
I'd like to make a motion that we write a letter from the STAC, from our chair, vice chair, with all the representative names on it, that does exactly what Commissioner Odoricio said, has some facts, statements, concerns that we can then work with our legislatures and CDOT to ensure that we're all having a voice and transparency through the process.
Okay, so there's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Further discussion?
Is that something Emily would help with too, as our liaison, to make sure that's crafted correctly?
The question I have, who's gonna write the letter? I'll sign it.
So you're saying the chair's not gonna write it? Well, I think all of our, the TP, I think Suzette and Dr. Cog, maybe Ron and some of our folks on our chairs can help us put some of the data, because they have issues they want to make sure. But I think it's going to have to be a collective. I don't know who writes it. You don't want me writing it. I promise you that. I don't think Kermit would write it, but I think what we have
Elizabeth's going to write it.
I wasn't going to volunteer, Elizabeth.
I'm volunteering her.
But I think that's the issue. I mean, we all think it's important, but we're going to have to find ways to get some of this done. I've been coming to STAC and being part of STAC for, I don't even want to say how long. I was on the other side for a lot of years, right? But I think one of the things that we do really well is we do what Commissioner Odoricio says. We bring up issues and we talk through our commissioners and we talk to our commissioners, but we often don't take it out of our time to really step it up as a group and make more push at levels with the governor, we advise the transportation commissioner, but the actions start at the top with legislators and governors. So I think this is a good start, and I think the letter should be CC'd to the governor and obviously transportation commission and executive director. But I think, Suzette, I'm not speaking for you, but would you like to do this as your last little thing as you move on to your new endeavor to help work with some of the chairs and folks to get some information put together and then circulate it through the STAC?
Yeah, I'm happy to coordinate with whoever else is getting voluntold.
Good. Because I don't know all the particular issues. And so I know they're important and I would be willing to sign the letter, but somebody's got to put the letter together.
Yeah, so what I would request is all the chairs that are in here, all the maybe representatives, get Suzette a name that you want her to work with. Obviously, Elizabeth will be from the upper, Ron, you from Dr. Cog to sort of support it, just from your guys' perspective to make sure it meets your guys' needs. And then whoever else, and get names to Suzette, and then hopefully they can get something together, drafted up that they all agree with, that maybe can come back to next month's meeting.
I think we should do it before then.
Next week's meeting.
Okay.
And
go ahead.
I would say maybe keep me, Emily, and Herman CC'd or looped in as you're ready for that, just to help keep it going to the right place.
Okay, there's a motion and a second on the floor. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those online?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Okay, those who disagree? Hearing none, then we'll consider it a unanimous vote. So Elizabeth and Suzette. All right. All right, thank you. Okay, Jamie.
Good morning, everybody. Is everybody on summer vacation? It's really lonely in this room. But that's okay because it means there's some of the good donuts are going to be left, I think. So I just wanted to clarify one thing. I don't know that the TLRC was defined. That's the Transportation Legislative Review Committee. And it's the combination of the House Transportation Committee and the Senate Transportation Committee. So their meetings are their own. They're a legislative committee. So it's not that anyone was not being invited or anything like that. It's just that's a legislative committee. So I just wanted to let you know, CDOT has no control over that. I also wanted to give, I know you guys weren't attacking Emily or anything like that, but I just want to give her a shout out. This was an exhausting, brutal legislative session. Everything happened at the end. I don't think she slept for 2 weeks. I'm not even sure. She probably wasn't eating either. I have no idea, but she looked like she'd been through the ringer. So just really want to give her a shout out that she worked really hard for CDOT and was in a tough position. So. All right. That said, I have very little to update in terms of congressional. I don't know if you've heard, it's an election year. So yep, I know, came as a surprise to me too. But as a result, there is just not a lot. There's almost nothing transportation related going on in Congress right now. It's a lot of, they're taking a lot of district work breaks and congressional recesses as they go back and forth to their districts to get ready for November. So the biggest thing is 3 weeks ago, the FAA reauthorization passed. So that's great. And I'm sure the airline industry and aeronautics are very happy that that happened. To continue my pattern of providing information that really helps no one, but is fun. Today is National Drive-In Day. So just want to give you a couple facts about drive-ins. The first one was in Camden, New Jersey in June of 1933. Camden, New Jersey is also the home of Campbell's Soup, where tomato soup is from, and my mom, but you know, no big deal. So it started because a gentleman's mother felt that movie theater seats were uncomfortable. So he put her in a car and put up a screen so that she could watch movies, and it took off. Early on, movie studios only sent their B movies to the drive-ins because nobody could hear. And so they didn't want their really good movies going to drive-in movies because then everybody just missed the movie. So the most popular name for currently operating drive-in theaters is the Starlight Drive-In. There are 10 in the United States. The largest drive-in is in Florida. It has 14 screens, is open year-round, and has room for 2,500 cars. And the smallest drive-in is in Australia, and it only has room for 36 cars. So just some quick drive-in movie. And if you go to Monte Vista, Colorado, one of the most unique drive-ins in the country has a hotel attached to it. So you can be in your hotel room and they'll pipe in the sound and you can watch the movie from the comfort of your bed. It's super cool unless it's a really dark movie. We watched Back to the Future and it was kind of hard to see just because the movie's really dark, but also don't go see A Quiet Place at the drive-in movie. Like that was one of the dumbest movies I've ever seen there because you can't hear anything.
They can put electric charging stations at East Post, so while you're there watching the show, you can plug in your car.
Yeah.
I think that is a very novel way to encourage EV adoption, Johnny Olson, which I'm sure was your intent.
There's an active drive-in movie in Montrose, by the way.
Is there?
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, Colorado has several really good drive-in movie theaters. So anyway, any questions about my non-update? Thanks, guys.
Okay. Actually, we're right on time. And so let's take a 10-minute break. And the donuts have arrived.
Oh, yeah, you're welcome to do the marriage, but I might sit at the table. I don't know. We'll see what happens. Okay. But she said you have a clicker then? I do. Some of these things I'm gonna like flip through and skip a couple of them. Okay. No, yeah. They were in the notes. They were in the notes in the presentation.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I didn't bug him with it because he had already
Oh,
put
here I got it.
sort of that note of what's off the top of the notes. Okay.
You need it here though.
Now it's time to get back together. Next item on the agenda is the 2050 statewide plan overview. Darius.
Thank you, Vince. This presentation is one, we'll have kind of a reiteration of the potential plans this summer in regards to the statewide plan and some of the presentations that were done with TC last month. We'll note everything that was presented to TC is not final yet. There is no actions going to happen this month, but if you have advice for the TC or advice on how to revise this as kind of the first step of setting the overall goals for the statewide plan process, welcome those today. And we do have our chief financial officer to go through some of the revenue projections for the long range revenue projection. It's a little redundant there, but that's fine. Next slide. So as a reminder, the last time thank you, Aaron. When we had this conversation, we wanted to kind of start getting ready as we have these conversations over the summer and getting the plans ready next year is to kind of take a look at what happened last time, and those are on our website. So if you need those, feel free to reach out, and we're happy to help out with those for the rural TPRs. I'll go through this very quickly. These are the required elements from either state or federal. We need to be performance-based, discuss environmental mitigations, identify our financial resources, address the planning factors. We have a minimum 20-year horizon, early and continuous public input, and seek out considered needs of DIN and traditionally underserved communities. As a reminder, these are the planning factors from the state and the federal. These are in either statute, Title 43, 1103, and then the rule, Title 23, Section 450 as well. So just as a couple reminder on here. So this is the proposed outline on here. Now we want to make this tailored to the needs of the particular TPR region. So I think that's where we'll set the stage with the first TPR chair meeting. So while this is kind of just a high level overview, it is not necessarily we have to do it all in this row or all in this manner. There may be opportunities to to have some flexibility in with it and see where we have specific needs within each community, depending on where you're at with it. Are we much ahead of the game, or do we need to take some time and really dig deep into the data so we can start having those conversations? I think the one thing that is new is the Transportation Commission had expressed that they would like to have town halls with the different TPRs that they represent in order to hear some of the issues and have some of those conversations with it. So we have added that as a potential item to schedule. later on in the fall. But of course, we're happy to hear your advice on that as well. And so this is just a draft schedule. Again, we want to make sure that it's tailored so it works for your community and what your plan will look like. But from a very high level, looking at potential, the first step is meeting with the TPR chairs in order so we can set the stage. And having those meetings throughout the summer and fall, looking at what was happening last time, looking at identifying needs, having the virtual town hall with the transportation commissioner, commissioner, that's a little redundant, but that's all right. We'll ignore that on the slide for right now. And then kind of getting into the winter session, we do know there's been a lot that has happened on the transit front, so we'll want to have a session on that. But we can adjust the schedule as need be for your needs, and we're not necessarily set into it, but just as a high level to kind of get the ideas started on here, with the goal of we want to have the statewide plan ready for adoption around August of 2025. We do have some flexibility in that. If we need more time, we can take more time. But that's the initial goal. And then they have the 10-year plan, which is the project-based plan, a few months after that. So any questions before I move on to proposed PD 14? All right. So this was the presentation given at the TC. Want to note that this is still a work in progress. I think there'll be another workshop in order to see how some of the language can evolve. So this may not be, this is completely what was in there. It may change between now and when it gets finalized, but it'll also set overall high level goals for the planning process kind of going forward. So we had, so CDOT has identified these kind of high level items, knowing that it is different in different areas, but we do know that safety has been an issue. We do know that there's issues with our roadways, and we do know that greenhouse gas emissions is something from the administration perspective that we want to reduce from the transportation sector and providing transit service. So from there is the draft goals that were proposed to the TC for consideration around safety, fixing our roadways, and sustainably increasing transportation choice. So again, draft wording, not necessarily final, but just to try to set the stage and get the conversation started. This slide provides an overview of the policy directive. This has been in place for numerous years, but it kind of sets the overall, at least since 2015 that I can remember, sets the overall high-level goals and performance measures for the statewide plan. This slide is just the review process. We do provide an annual update on the measures that are selected by the TC on an annual basis, and they have the opportunity to update those measures during the entire process. So it's supposed to be a kind of a living document where we can make updates as changes, as situations change, knowing that when we come back in 5 years again and for the next planning cycle, the 2055 plan, there are situations may have changed. There may be other issues that have risen to the top. And so one of the proposed revisions to this is to kind of focus on the high level measures. There are a lot of measures in there, and I think we still want to show that they are important, but from a planning perspective, what are the top measures? So when we have the conversations with the public, we can quickly identify what the next iteration of the planning cycle will try to solve, knowing that, maintenance is still important. Reliability and congestion is still important. Employee safety is still important. And we will have a place for those in our performance program. But for the statewide plan, what are the top level measures? And so for the safety area, advancing transportation is taking a look at reducing traffic fatalities and traffic related serious injuries, over that 10-year period. So getting about a 50% reduction, same with vulnerable road users. So identifying those in there, because that has been when we look at the data, they have been disproportionately impact as pedestrians in the number of fatalities and serious injuries over the past few years. This is just some definitions on what a vulnerable road user is and what a serious bodily injury is. So happy to answer questions on that, but for the sake of time, I'll skip over this slide. This is some data that was presented over the past 10 years on the number of roadway traffic-related fatalities and traffic-related serious injuries, which we have seen increase steadily since 2010, and this data kind of outlines that. We'll note that we have seen for 2024 some improvement in these statistics as well. And this is for vulnerable road users. Okay, and I'll try not to breathe in the microphone. I apologize for that. As far as our roadways, taking care of our assets. So a couple of measures. One, we want to try to get the interstate core at or below 1%. Reason behind that is we know the interstate is the lifeblood of the transportation system. We want to make sure that we take care of those interstates and get those interstates that are the portions of the interstate identified as poor down and address those with the strategic funds we have. In addition, we want to continue some of the good work that was done with our road program and make sure that we're keeping the rest of the system in higher moderate drivability life. Additionally, make sure that we address any bridges and keep the condition at or keep them in good condition and keep the number of poor at or below 5%. Both on the state highway system, national highway system. These are the metrics explanations. So if I can go through these, but if there's any questions, but for the sake of time, I'll run through these fairly quickly. One identifies how we measure the drivability life, our standard measure for measuring pavement condition that we've been using since 2013. The other is the national performance measure from FHWA that is used to rate each state, with the caveat that there is a limit of 5% per state before there are restrictions in the flexibility of use of certain funding. And this is the current condition of these two measures based on the current data that we have finalized as of now, with on the left, the percent for interstates. We have seen some improvement in 2022, but we'll note that a lot of the investments that are currently in progress or have just been completed probably won't be affected or probably won't be reflected in here. And then we have drivability life as well, the percent on the state highway system that is high or moderate. And Ron, happy to take a question.
Yes, sir. Just a question on the data.
Yes.
When it's a percent of what?
Percent of lane miles.
Percent of lane miles. And do you have that data broken down by CDOT region rather than just statewide?
We do.
Would you mind sharing that out?
Absolutely. We'll be happy to share it with everybody here. And I will also note, I think we have it on our website too, under the performance section. We do have the NPM and drivability life as well by segment, each 1/10 of a mile segment. There is a dashboard for that and for the bridge measure as well, but happy to do so. For bridges, again, an explanation on how the bridge is rated based off of the three major pieces of it: the deck, the superstructure, and the substructure. And then there's a separate rating for culverts. Again, happy to answer questions, but for the sake of time, we'll quickly go through that. Based off of a 0 to 9 scale, and the lowest component determines the overall structure rating for each structure. And then we take a look at the total deck area of all the structures for the system. And here is the current condition here is the current statistics in poor condition for both the national highway system and the state highway system. Again, we are below that target. We're sitting at about 4.25%. That jump that we saw on here is when the I-70 viaduct structure went into poor condition. I-70 viaduct structure was the largest structure in the state. It is no longer a structure anymore. So that's kind of where we have the drop, why we saw that 3-year dip in there. So otherwise, we've been staying steady on there with some of the investments that we have made over the past 6 years. Finally, sustainably increasing transportation choice. So kind of focusing on the goals of increasing the revenue service miles for transit services statewide, knowing that it's not all from the state, but taking a look at the statewide revenue service miles as a whole. And then again, the greenhouse gas reduction from the transportation sector, trying to be in line with the roadmap and looking at approximately a 50% reduction by over the next 10 years. So knowing that planning is not all the entire portion of it, but from a goal perspective, that's the proposed measure. So yes, Gary.
Yeah, on the transit, just reviewing and following this for years. Why don't we measure amount of ridership or the number of people served rather than just lane miles that are driven by a bus? I mean, are we measuring actually how many people we're getting into transit compared to just how many miles we're driving buses up and down the road?
That is a possibility. If when this comes up for a recommendation, that can be recommended as a potential metric. The idea behind revenue service miles is providing the service on there for folks to actually to use it. And I think I'm having a little bit deja vu because I think we had the same conversation with MMOF in those pieces on there. So that's a potential on there. So these are just initial thoughts in order to see what would be the best measure on there. So that could be a recommendation on there. And that's one that the Transportation Commission can consider.
So I'm going to tag a little bit onto Gary. He spoke before me. But I think when we, as an organization, North Front Range, or as a local community, we often want to see a return on our investment. So when we're investing, so like Gary said, we drive 15 million miles, but was there anybody on it, even though we provided the service? So I think it's important that we look at this as a return on our investment. If we have 2 million miles and 5,000 riders right now, we had 15 million and we still have 5,000 riders. Are we really investing our taxpayers' dollars well in a fiduciary responsibility, or are we just saying if the field of dreams, if we build that they will come? I think we're all a proponent of transit and all a proponent of making sure people have choice, but we're also a proponent of making sure we're spending the money in the right place, right? So I think those are the return on our investment questions I think Gary's asking. Like, how do we show that? How do I go back to my constituents and say, look, this is what we've done? And it's easier for us to sell our constituents the expenditures when we're actually getting a return.
And we're actually getting the service that people are expecting, doing the goal. So I think measuring both is probably important, but we need to make sure we're reaching the overall goal. And the concern I've seen with all this is we're reducing the number of things we're tracking, which then reduces your ability to see if you're actually reaching the overall goal that the public wants to see. And best where to spend it. And like with transit, is it designed properly to do what we're wanting it to do? You can run a bus anywhere to get the miles, but if you're not putting the stops in the right spots and serving the right people, you're not going to get the ridership. So that's where we need to make sure we're tracking stuff so we can actually try to meet our goals. And that's through all this and my concern of reducing all the metrics into smaller number of things being tracked, because then it gets harder to know what's working and what's not, where we need to maybe shift things on a budgetary perspective for the commission.
Appreciate the input in the comments. Unless John, you have more. Oh, Ron. Ron.
Yeah, I think just to Gary and Johnny's points, I'd like to raise the same issue related to pavement condition on the interstate system. I think a lane mile that carries, I don't know, 20,000 vehicles a day that's in poor condition might be slightly different than a lane mile of interstate that carries 50,000 vehicles a day on it. And I think the measures ought to also consider sort of that return on investment for pavement condition relative to the number of people that are actually impacted. And I don't see that in the pavement condition measures either.
Okay. Appreciate the input on that. The only thing I would add on there is we are using for the interstate, the federal measure, but I do appreciate your input on the usage of there, because as we know, that the usage goes up in addition to regular wear and tear. That will determine how fast it's being the deterioration rate on there. I'm trying to speak as even more intelligently, even though I'm not an engineer on there. I'm just a planner. So a couple of statistics on the current revenue service miles. Of course, this is taking a look at the National Transit Database, which will also have ridership as a reporting on there. In addition to some of the something like bus staying, which isn't required to report in the National Transit Database. And then, of course, we do have the greenhouse gas roadmap. Again, not going to go too far into this. There is some near-term strategies that are laid out on there. I believe looking at active transportation, looking at transit, clean fleet. So some of the items that are outside of the normal statewide planning process, but working together, can we take a look at reducing the emissions from the transportation sector? So I'm not going to go too much further into that, knowing that we do have the GHG planning standard, which the CDOT and our each of the 5 MPOs do have a specific target for reduction measures in 2030, 2040, and 2050. Okay. Any other questions or advice?
Back slide. So my question is, the state is now working to update the roadmap. We've been in the roadmap for 1.5 years. How are we doing? Why are we updating? Is there something that we're going to add, change, tweak, throw out, new baby bathwater? I don't know. I'm just like to know what that looks like.
Very good question. I think the update is close to done. What we're waiting on is some further modeling on future forecasts of that. As far as the near-term actions, those have been done and those are published online. That was done, I believe, February or March. So, but there is some leftover modeling in order to take a look at what future greenhouse gas emissions will be.
Yeah, since this is kind of the end of the P14.
Yeah.
I guess I'd like to know why there was such a major rewrite on reducing the number of track matrix. What was the goal of that? Who was involved with those decisions? Because this is the first we've heard of it as STAC, which is supposed to be helping guide or at least give input on the state system. So.
Excellent question. So this is the kind of the first step at this, and the idea behind that is to have goals and measures that are relatable when we have those conversations with the public, knowing that all the other measures are still important and are not necessarily going to go away, but we will have those in the other places within our reporting structure, but from a high level to try and identify, knowing we do have limited funds, those high level measures that will be affecting the future of the transportation system.
I guess I'd like to ask, when you say, Darius, that your comments are noted, what does that mean?
It means that I will take your comments and bring bring them back to the commission for their consideration when they're taking a look at this. So the comments on changes to the transit to include ridership, absolutely. In fact, one of the commissioners had brought that up. The comments on the usage of the interstates will be happy to include that to the commission for them to consider on a final draft of this. So by no means is this going to be the final draft. This is a first stab at it, a first draft on that. And of course, the commission is going to want to put their own stamp on it, so to speak.
I'd like to follow up on, this is a document for the public. And I think it's important that we represent the shortfall of all the assets of the state. I mean, you can't have highways without culverts and retaining walls, and all the rest areas is one that you hear a lot that we'd like to see more rest areas. Without them understanding the shortfall in funding and how we're falling behind further and further, we'll see with the projection of our revenues not keeping up with inflation. How are we supposed to educate the legislature and the public if we continue to just shrink down the metrics that we present to them when we are not showing them the entire picture of the shortfall? Even our transit, we have lots of new funding now, but we're building a lot of new infrastructure that's going to need maintenance and replacement eventually. So if we're not showing the potential shortfalls in the future, how are we going to continue to advocate for increased funding to preserve the system? As we reduce the metrics that we show to the public, it's very concerning to me that we're doing this. It feels like it's more of a political perspective to show that we're meeting these goals, but not showing them the shortfall of all the others.
Excellent question. I think with the, oh, okay. All right. One of the other areas that is required and does have all the metrics is our asset management plan. So when we take a look at trying to identify projects and strategic funds, one of the things we not necessarily will fund is our fleet or our internal buildings, but they are still important assets that we want to take care of, and we want to make sure that we have them in good condition. But it's not necessarily some item that is going to be in our statewide plan. But they will still be in our transportation asset management plan, which is a federally mandated plan. And we will have inventory, we will have usable life, we will have those metrics in there as well. And that we do report out to, is available on our website, and do report on those periodically and set the appropriate budgets for them. But it does come out of a different pot.
But for planning, the planning process, we need to be planning as a whole unit and not just getting so focused into specifics. And that's why the asset management plan, in my opinion, should be a large part of the statewide planning process, because that is what we're supposed to be helping plan for. Not just a 10-year plan projects, but we're supposed to be helping manage the entire system.
And one of the, we tried to cut this presentation down just to hear from what we had last time, but we do want to make sure that we integrate the ideas and decisions on not only the transportation asset management plan, but also the transit plan, the transit connection studies that was discussed last time, and the upcoming safety plan. And of course, the other modal plans on there, knowing that there's a lot of different plans that come up on here that we want to make sure that we hear what the concerns are, because they all together fit into there. But appreciate the comments and on there, and happy to pass that back to the Transportation Commission when we talk. Is it next week or the week after? I've lost track of time, Herman. All right.
I guess, I mean, maybe to reiterate what Gary was saying is, when you are giving a plan and saying, this is what we're doing, and this is going to the public, you don't want to just say, bright, shiny object, this is what we're trying to do with just this. The sum of the parts is is part of the whole. And when you don't see the whole as the presentation, then it may look or appear more slighted to a positive atmosphere for CDOT. And it's not saying that CDOT's not doing a great job, but it's more of saying this is just a piece of a larger whole of, hey, by the way, maintenance needs to be addressed. And we're not taking that into account with this in as much as that this is for something else. But we also do acknowledge that we have a lot of issues that are asset management related. And am I explaining that right, Gary? I guess I'm looking at it from how do you convey to the public and the people that are going to go, wait, our roads still are not in great shape, but you're doing all of this other stuff. That's great, but our roads are still not in great shape. So how do you convey that to the greater public, to TC, so that messaging is conveyed in a better way?
Thank you for the comment. But before we get to Ron, thank you for the comment. Appreciate that. I think that's a very good point. Is we're taking a look at transportation planning here, but we don't necessarily have maintenance on there, and that's a huge issue that we want to kind of continually we continually talk about on there in order to make sure that the snow is taken care of with all the different snowstorms, and the roads are open, and taking care of some of the other minor repairs that are done throughout that process. That's not throughout our transportation system that is not necessarily considered in this process. We're taking a look at those future larger capital construction projects, but also taking into consideration of, we know that there is some items on there. We know that there are roads in poor condition. Can we take a look at our capital construction program and address those poor roads, for example, in order to help our asset management program catch up in the future? So yeah, but thank you. Appreciate the input, Ron.
I just want to say, I appreciate sort of the focus, and I understand all the points that are being made. Obviously, maintaining and operating the system is a core function for CDOT and for the state highway system. That's important. That's not going to be not important. I think there is some value to sort of focusing on the highest priority things, because the truth is, if everything's important, then nothing's important. And so at least from setting the framework for developing a statewide plan and setting out high level sort of priorities and outcomes, it is helpful to focus. And I think what I'm hearing is also don't lose the opportunity to communicate to the public on the other aspects of the system. And I think you can do both. I think it's okay to focus on MPD 14 and identify sort of the biggest priorities or the things that this development of this statewide plan is going to really focus on, and not lose sight of all the other components. And I think that's so. I do appreciate a little bit of the focus, and I understand sort of the need to also sort of make sure we don't lose track of those other aspects of the system.
Just the interstates are important to us. They always float to the top, but we have two interstates that have, in my district, Eastern, I-76 and I-70, that need hundreds of millions, billion of dollars over the next 10, 15 years. That takes all funding off of all the other state highways that are critical to connect our communities. So that's a concern when we just break it down to interstate, and the other is the interstate, to keep it, especially to try to get down to the one, will take all of our funding for Eastern TPR. I mean, and we have other state highways, that one project that was just mentioned at our meeting. Well, we're not getting to the worst section of that with our 7-mile rehabilitation. We're not getting to the worst part of that highway. We have no funding to address that worst part of the highway coming out of anything else at this point. So that's the concern when we focus just on those big ones without trying to balance in the planning process how we balance that in a statewide budget.
Appreciate the concern, Gary, on that. And when we go in and have those conversations with you, essentially, later on this summer, is taking a look at this. This is not like it must be this on here is kind of like a guideline of how we want the state to be, because we do have rest areas in the 10-year plan. Absolutely. There may be, I'm just picking this up, but there may be a rest area that is very important for either freight travel or tourism travel, and we need to take care of it. There's a lot of deferred maintenance on there that we need to take care of it, and that may be identified in your prioritization process. Will that affect any of these measures? No, but that may be important to the region. That may rise to the top on there. So the only other piece that I want to put in with the interstates is that 5% piece. Is if we go over 5% for in the state for the interstates, then we are restricted in our most flexible funding, and we will be forced to spend it on the interstates. And we don't want to necessarily do that, be forced to do that, but be able to be proactive. So yes, agreed it is an issue. Agreed that's probably going to be a tough conversation in order to figure that out. Maybe that will get into some of the stuff. I hate to put it on Jeff, but we can talk about some of those stuff on there. But yes, that is a concern, is how do we balance those priorities? And I think those are some of the conversations we want to have over the over the summer and when we put together these plans.
So I'm going to try to sort of, because I agree with everything being said, but I want to see if I understand it like they understand it. I agree with Ron. Don't say that out loud. But PD 14 is a policy, right? It's setting the direction for the future plan, the 2050 plan. So these are the commission's policies of what they want to see high level in the plan. Then we have our TAMP, and then we have our performance measures that we track through all the other things that sometimes gets lost. So, you know, asset management, maintaining what we have, safety, transits, greenhouse gas, those are the high level initiatives that this Transportation Commission wants to put out. No priority order, that's just their policies. But having the other data is important when we are talking to people. We've talked about interstates. The last report I saw, we're 48th in the nation on rural interstates. We're 43rd overall in conditioned pavement. 43 out of 50 is, I would say, not a very success, whether we're the 5% over or not over. So I think what we struggle with is we see the policy, you know, it's like being on a city council, we set policy, and then they go down and they do all their work below us, and then it comes back up, and then we're like, how do we get here? And I think what we worry about is how did we get here? And that's sort of the, I think, maybe tying the TAMP, maybe in the policy, maybe someday coming back and saying, all right, here's the policies, but here's how we track them, and here's where we're at. You know, I know we can do that, but it's how we do that in the 2050 plan and how we build our plan. So I agree with what everybody's saying, but this is a high level policy from the commission to give direction to the DOT to say, this is what's important to us.
Thank you. Generally agree with all that. And I think when we have those conversations, we won't have just 3 maps or so. We will have a complete package of different information that we've already had the put together for the boundary study piece, and we can improve on that using some of the GIS tools we have on here. I want to try to avoid printing out 1,500 maps like we did last time and use more electronic means, but definitely we have a lot of data here that can help inform there. And it's, I couldn't agree more. It's a high level policy, not necessarily want to forget there may be specific issues that rise to the top in specific areas that we want to take a look at. But in general, we want to see better condition of the roadways, and we want to see safer roadways, and we want to achieve the greenhouse gas reductions that the legislature has put out for us. Okay. And I think that means my time is up, and I'm going to turn it over to Jeff.
All right. Good morning. So it's still morning. Yes. I'm going to present to you today on the 2050 revenue forecast. So the 2050 revenue forecast is our long-range revenue projection. It is part of the program distribution process you're familiar with. You all spent significant amount of time providing input over the prior months on how to distribute some of our programs that have a formula allocation. One of the other key elements of program distribution is the long-range revenue process, the process whereby we do a forecast of long-range revenues over the time horizon of the long-range plan. And then we use that revenue forecast to inform the statewide plan, regional plans, the MPO plans. It's used to establish fiscal constraint on TIPS and STIPs. It is also the source of information that we use to establish constraint for the 10-year plan. So as part of this statewide plan update, when you start working on we start working on updating the next 4 years of the 10-year plan. We'll use this long-range revenue forecast to identify what we think we can plan to in terms of available funds for the 10-year plan. So our forecast is developed. We have our own in-house forecasting capabilities. We have a forecast model that is maintained by our Office of Financial Management and Budget. And I'll walk through a little bit of some of the key inputs and assumptions in the next few slides on what goes into that revenue model. So I'm going to walk you through what is essentially our first draft of the 2050 revenue projections. I presented this to Commission a couple of weeks ago. One of the big caveats I will provide is that this presentation that you have in front of you does not yet have built into it the effects of Senate Bill 184 and Senate Bill 230, which are the two big pieces of transportation legislation coming out of this past session that are providing a significant amount of additional enterprise funding focused on transit and rail. So that will, we are in the process of updating this presentation to include that, and I'll try to note where you'll see some changes. So this is our forecast at the very highest level. It starts at fiscal year 25, which begins on July 1, with a forecast of about 2.80 billion. And it grows to about 3.04 billion over the next 25 years. That includes the CDOT revenue, but it also includes the revenues from the now five enterprises within CDOT. Roughly speaking, over that time period, we're looking at about 2% annual growth over that time period. Here's another view of that same forecast data. This is providing a compositional comparison of the forecast in 2025 and 2030. So you can see sort of how our funding changes over the course of that 25 years. So again, we're at about 2.08 billion today, going to about 3.04 billion in 2050. I can actually tell you that once we update this to incorporate the effect of 184 and 230, that 3.04 billion will be closer to 3.5 billion. One of the more notable changes also will be the proportion of funding flowing through the enterprises. You see today that the enterprises represent about 16% of funding. Once accounting for the impacts of those two new bills, you'll see that gray slice CDOT enterprises will no longer be 17%, it will increase to about 25%. So pretty big implications coming out of both of those bills. So before we get into the individual categories of funding, and that's what I'm going to do, I'm going to walk through essentially every one of these individual categories of funding and talk about what the forecast looks like for each of those categories. But before I get into that, I'm going to start by going through just some basic assumptions that have gone into our forecast. One of the most basic assumptions, and really that bullet should be relabeled to say fee, rather than say fee inputs and assumptions, it really should say state funding assumptions, because the assumptions are based on are focused on more than just fees. But one of the most basic assumptions is that state funding inputs and assumptions are based on current law. So what that means is that we did not speculate in our forecast about what the legislature might do over the next 25 years. While it's unlikely that nothing will change in state law related to transportation funding, we're not in this forecast going in and trying to make different assumptions. We assume current rates for the gas tax. We don't assume a gas tax increase. We assume that the current fee structures don't change over the forecast period. Senate Bill 260 put in place some general fund transfers that go through 2032. We're not assuming that the legislature extends those general fund transfers beyond 2032. So again, we are assuming that our forecast is built on current law. We do not, on the state side, make any additional assumptions, at least in this baseline forecast, about what we think the legislature is going to do. On the federal side, we do make a few assumptions, but the federal apportionments are based on current law, the Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act, but we assume that once the IIJA goes away in fiscal year 26, that it is replaced by something else, and that something else grows at a rate of about 2% a year. The reason we're growing at about 2% a year is because historically that's about what we've seen. Well, I will say the IIJA was atypical in the level at which it jumped up from the prior bill. Prior to that, what we'd seen over time is that between bills and from bill to bill, we saw about 2% growth. So we're not assuming that the IIJA funding levels drop back down, but we are assuming that they will just continue from where they're at and grow at about 2% a year over time. So again, those are probably the two most basic assumptions that go into our forecast. With that sort of serving as the foundation, we then incorporate a wide variety of data sources into our forecasting model to generate the revenue forecast. That includes national economic performance indicators, estimates of inflation, state population and demographic data, VMT data, vehicle sale and energy consumption data, state fleet data. I'll also note that our model is consistent with the state's overall policy on electric vehicle adoption, and it's based on the Colorado Clean Cars Standard. Let's see here. So again, I'm going to briefly touch on each of the primary categories of funding that we saw in those pie charts at the beginning, and I'll start with HUTF. So HUTF is composed of a number of different revenue sources. The HUTF is funded by the state gas and diesel tax. It's also funded by the per gallon gas and diesel road usage fee, registration fees, faster fees, and a portion of the retail delivery fee. This slide shows the composition of the state HUTF forecast over time. The most notable feature you'll see here is the decline in fuel taxes and fees as internal combustion engine vehicles become more fuel efficient and as they are replaced entirely by electric vehicles. However, you see that the decline is offset by the growth in EV registration fees. And again, that was very much as designed in Senate Bill 260. Senate Bill 260 put in increased EV registration fees that were calculated to essentially try to keep parity with that decrease. So you see that over time, the composition of the HUTF changes from being significantly relying on fuel taxes and fuel fees with increasing reliance on electric vehicle registration fees. HUTF revenue in this forecast increases from about $660 million in fiscal year 25 to a little under $1 billion over the next 25 years. And again, I'll emphasize this multiple times throughout the presentation. We're assuming current law. So we're not assuming an increase in the state gas tax. We're not assuming that the current fee structure is replaced by a mileage-based user fee or other structure, although it's probably more likely than not that something will change at the state level in the next 25 years, probably sooner. But again, we're not assuming that in our baseline forecast. So again, our forecast for electric vehicle adoption assumes the sales targets under the Colorado Clean Cars Standard will be met. So what that means is that we'll see EVs on the road in Colorado increase from about 183,000 in fiscal year 25 to about 942,000 in fiscal year 31. And again, that's one of the key drivers behind that shift from fuel taxes to EV registration fees as a source of HUTF revenue. So just a couple of notes on HUTF distribution. This slide outlines how HUTF revenues are divided according to different statutory formulas between CDOT, cities and counties, and off the top. I missed your earlier discussion, but I know that off the top came up in your discussion. This is an example of where, again, we do not assume to know what the legislature is going to do in our forecast. The reality is we at some point will need a fix to the off-the-top appropriation issue, but we are not making an assumption within our forecast. And just to clarify what that off-the-top appropriation issue is, off-the-top appropriations are the portion of the HUTF that come off the top and go to the DOR and the Department of Public Safety. And historically, those allocations have grown faster than overall HUTF growth. Statutorily, they're allowed to grow up to 6% a year. We have seen probably about 5% a year growth in the HUTF. At the same time, the HUTF is not growing 5%. So what it means is that over time, that off the top appropriation is taking a bigger piece of the HUTF pie, and we will reach a point in the next decade where that becomes unsustainable, where it would completely consume the first stream revenue source, which without a legislative fix would create some issues in terms of not being able to fund some things that are only eligible under the first stream. So again, we're not addressing that issue in our forecast. We assume that off the top will continue to grow at about 5%, and that does over time further squeeze the portion of the HUTF going to cities, counties, and the state. So I'm going to go through relatively quickly our forecast for enterprises. So again, 5 enterprises within CDOT right now. The Bridge and Tunnel Enterprise with revenues flowing from the Faster Bridge Safety Surcharge and from Senate Bill 260, the Bridge and Tunnel Impact Fee and Retail Delivery Fee. The Colorado Transportation Investment Office, or HPTE, with revenues from toll and fine revenues on express lane corridors. Again, this is where we're going to have to update our forecast because Senate Bill 184 will direct a new congestion impact fee on short-term rental vehicles to the CTIO. Again, we're still working on adding this into our forecast, but projections are that that will add about $60 million to the CTIO forecast in its first full year of collections. The Clean Transit Enterprise currently receives revenues from the retail delivery fee. This is the other place where we will have an impact we need to update. Senate Bill 230 imposes a new gas and a new oil and gas production fee, and it directs that revenue to CTE. We expect, I think, first full year under of collections will be about 120 million. So pretty substantial increase in funding to the Clean Transit Enterprise, which today gets about $8 million a year. The non-attainment enterprise with revenues from the retail delivery fee and per ride fee, and then the fuels impact fee with revenues from the fuels impact reduction fee. So taking that all together, here's the enterprise forecast growing from about 337 million in fiscal year 25 to about 527 million over the forecast period. And again, this is before incorporating the changes from Senate Bill 184 and 230. So once we do that, you will see that increase to north of 600 million in the updated forecast. Right now, I think it's at a little over 500, about 527 million. State General Fund. So the our forecast includes a couple of different general fund transfers put in place under Senate Bill 260. The first is a general fund transfer that begins this upcoming fiscal year. 260 put in a $100 million. Actually, it's 2 general fund transfers totaling 107 million that begin in fiscal year 2025. Out of that 107 million, about 7 million goes to the Revitalizing Main Streets program. 100 million in our fiscal year 25 budget is allocated. The majority of that, about 85 million, to the 10-year plan. About 15 million of that is going into our contingency. That general fund transfers, those 2 general fund transfers, about 100 million plus 7 million continue through fiscal year 29. Then they step down a little bit to about 89.5 million and continue through fiscal year 32. We also have a $10.5 million general fund transfer to the MMOF between fiscal year 25 and fiscal year 32. So again, assuming current law, we assume that when we get to fiscal year 33, those general fund transfers go away. We go from seeing an $89.5 million transfer to CDOT and a $10.5 million transfer to the 10-year plan to the MMOF, and we are forecasting those going to 0 in fiscal year 33. All right. This slide actually needs to be updated. It should be a little bit broader than this. It should be essentially other state funding sources. So the other state funding sources include not only what is on this slide, which is miscellaneous sources of revenue, but it also includes all those other state sources of funding that aren't captured under HUTF enterprises or general fund. Most notably, that's aeronautics fuel tax revenue, that's the MMOF fee revenue, and that's state safety education funding. And so this portion of our forecast represents about 125 million, growing to about 175 or 70 million over the forecast period. All right, our last category of funding is federal funding. We received formula funding through several programs administered by FHWA, FTA, and NHTSA. In addition to the formula funding, we also receive funding through several discretionary grant programs. I won't go through each of these, but you can just see each of those federal revenue streams really come in a large number of different programs. These are the FHWA programs that we forecast. These are the Federal Transit Administration programs that flow through CDOT, and then the NHTSA programs that flow through CDOT. Again, in addition to that, we also have discretionary grant funding that can vary wildly, which is why we don't typically include that in budgets and long-range revenue forecasts. I can tell you that over the last 10 years, we've averaged about 75 million a year in discretionary grant funding to CDOT or to the Bridge and Tunnel Enterprise. So I'm going to tell you to ignore that bar chart off to the right. Something didn't pull through right on this. It's supposed to show all of the various federal revenue streams. It only actually shows FHWA. I will tell you though that over this forecast period, our federal forecast begins at about 926 million in fiscal year 25 for all three of those federal funding streams, and it grows to about 1.5 billion over the forecast period. Again, fundamental assumption we've made here is that the IIJA, the elevated levels under the IIJA remain elevated, and from that point we continue to grow at about 2% a year. So kind of going back to where we started, if you look at the overall forecast, including each of the categories of funding we just walked through, we started about 2.2 billion in revenues. That increases to about a little over 3 billion in fiscal year 50. Although, as I noted previously, once we update to include those additional enterprise revenues, it's closer to 3.5 billion by 2050. Over on the left, you can see how each of these categories of funding change over time. So enterprise revenue is on the right and is the fastest growing source. So even when we update to include the new enterprise revenue, we're still going to be seeing that annual growth that over the forecast period of about 2.6% annually in terms of revenue growth through the enterprises. Federal revenue grows at about 2% annually because that's what we assumed it would grow at. Other state revenue sources grow at about 1% a year, and then state HETF is growing at about a little less than 2% a year, about 1.8% a year. So if you take that all together, what we're looking at over the forecast period is somewhere around 2% roughly in average annual growth in revenues. Here's the forecast in inflation adjusted terms. So obviously 2%, when you think in particular what you think of what we've seen in recent inflation, 2% is not keeping up with inflation, right? So over, I think about the last 25 years, I think inflation has averaged more like 2.5%. We're growing in our forecast about 2%. In terms of purchasing power, obviously that means declining purchasing power. In fiscal year 25, our forecast totals about 1.8 billion compared to an actual, I'm sorry, in fiscal year 2050, our forecast is about a little less than 18% less than today in terms of actual inflation adjusted purchasing power. I will say, however, that as long as we've been doing revenue forecasts, as long as I have been here, that has always been the case. And actually, this is probably one of the better looking forecasts we've seen. So I think a lot of the things that have happened legislatively in the last few years have done a lot to actually mitigate that decline. So while that doesn't sound great, I will say it is a better picture than what we have had in pretty much every prior long-range forecast that we've done here in the last 20 years, probably. All right, so I'm gonna kind of wrap up here. I'm gonna wrap up with a few things to consider, and then I'm gonna do a quick comparison to our last forecast, the 2045 statewide plan revenue forecast. So a couple of key considerations on this forecast, and again, I'm going to probably repeat myself a few times. As you know, assumes current law, which means that we're not assuming any changes through 2050. Our forecast also assumes that, you know, over time, state fuel tax and fee revenue will gradually be replaced by EV revenue, and overall HUTF growth slows. We also assume again that the general fund support ends in fiscal year 32, since that is the last year of general fund transfers that are identified in current law. And then finally, we're also assuming that the off the top appropriations continue to grow. If a legislative fix comes to that, that will help that will help to increase HUTF revenues flowing to CDOT and cities and counties. Again, we're assuming 2% growth in federal revenue. I think I'd be remiss if I didn't note that one of the big issues there is that there is a downside risk that is unsustainable. The current Highway Trust Fund is insolvent. It has been for several years. That means that the current levels of transportation funding are supported by general fund transfers. I have not seen or heard of anything on the table right now for a long-term fix. We're not going to try to figure that out here. We're going to assume that we're going to continue to grow. We're going to assume that that is going to be figured out, but that will be a big issue in terms of trying to maintain that level of funding long-term. And again, as I noted, I misspoke on I said about 2.5%. I was about right. We've got about a little bit less than 2% annual growth compared to historic inflation over the last 30 years of about 2.5%. So I'm not going to go through this, but this slide gives you sort of a comparison to the 2050 forecast to the 2045 forecast that we did several years ago for the current plan. Shows you kind of plus and minus. What are the differences between the two forecasts, with the minus meaning, you know, that's a negative to that particular forecast, and a plus obviously meaning that that improves the forecast relative to the other one. So this is what the two forecasts look like if you put them side by side. Over the same time period, the new 2050 forecast is about 20% higher than the previous 2045 forecast. And again, that is before incorporating Senate Bill 184 and Senate Bill 230. So that will look even better once we build that in. Another view, but this one's showing how the composition of the forecast among funding categories has changed between 2045 and 2050. So while it's 20% higher, actually more than that, you know, there are some notable differences in terms of what kind of dollars make up the forecast. So in the 2045 forecast, we essentially assumed that some unidentified funding source would replace Senate Bill 267 and continue into the future. You see that off on the right, additional assumed revenue. We've removed that assumption in the 2050 forecast. What was removed was more than replaced primarily by increases in federal funding under the IIJA, and our assumption that those elevated funding levels will continue post IIJA. The other place where we've replaced that additional assumed revenue is the enterprise funding. So while we are 20% higher, it's not necessarily 20% higher with complete flexibility. Much of that growth is in either federal programs, a large portion of which are sort of locked in and dedicated to legislatively mandated programs, or similarly locked in, so to speak, with respect to the enterprises. All right. So I'll wrap up here, hand it back to Darius, just to give you a little bit of perspective on sort of where we're at in the process. I believe we'll be back probably in July with the Transportation Commission to look at both updates to this forecast post-legislative session. We will also start looking at the next part of this process. The next part of this process is basically to say, okay, if we've got a good forecast we're comfortable with, now what do we think it means? How do we think those dollars will be allocated? So we'll probably start looking at that in July, and that'll involve looking at some assumptions about, you know, how much do we think will go into maintenance? How much do we think will be available for the 10-year plan, et cetera? So I think we'll get to that part of the process in the July timeframe. So with that, happy to take any questions if you have any, or if we have time for any. But otherwise, I'm sure we'll be back to discuss more probably later in the summer.
Yeah,
with the enterprises and the additional funding, like you mentioned, a lot of it's not flexible to go anywhere. A lot of it's dedicated to new services that CDOT's providing, electrification and all these other enterprise things. Do you have anything to represent that in proportion to where the revenues are? Have you been able to develop any sort of graphs, especially with all the new transit funding? That budget's going to look like it's going up drastically, but really for maintenance of our system, we're not seeing any of that actually come to the maintenance. So is there any way to represent that so that, because people, when they see these extra hundreds of millions, if it's just showing in the revenue, we're gonna, in our planning process, have a lot of people, well, we should have these extra hundreds of millions to put onto the roads and these, and to maintain things.
Yeah.
That's not there.
So I think, at a high level in here, you can, it's a little bit hard to see that, but you can see even on this slide, right? You can see, okay, state HETF, I'm not seeing a huge amount of growth for a 25-year period on this, right? General fund is flat. You can see here, and then in a couple different places when you pull it apart, where the growth is and where it's not. I think what you're describing is probably something that you'll be able to pull apart more when we get to sort of the allocation piece, because I think that's when you'll be able to sort of see, well, what does this actually mean? Where did the dollars actually go? Based in part on assumptions about how we think that the Transportation Commission will choose to allocate, but almost more significantly based on what the restrictions are on the dollar. So I think to answer your question, I think yes, I think you'll see more of that, or that picture probably more clearly when we start to look at the allocations, because that's when we'll look at some assumptions like, well, what do we think maintenance funding looks like over time? And what do we think funding for the 10-year plan looks like over time relative to other categories?
Heather. Your slide with the comparison forecasts, I'm struggling with the EV and almost $1 million assumption, or 1 million EVs in the next 5 years coming to the state of Colorado. I guess, is this part of what the initiative has been set out for and we're hoping that it actually happens, or is this a reality? Because I don't personally see 930,000 electric vehicles happening in 5 years.
So we are simply using the forecast that assumes our forecast is based on the sales target that is established under the Colorado Clean Cars Standard. Others are probably better equipped than myself to talk to you about sort of the likelihood or not of meeting those. I know that we've actually been exceeding sales target projections in the more recent years. From a revenue forecast perspective, it almost doesn't matter because the way that the EV registration fee was put in place under Senate Bill 260, I could assume whatever number of electric vehicles I want to assume is not going to materially change the forecast, because there's essentially almost a dollar for dollar trade-off between the increased EV registration fee from fuel tax. So it
That's
really
where
doesn't.
I'm confused, because you're saying that this is supposed to overcome the fuel tax, but if it doesn't produce, then how is that supposed to switch? I'm confused by that.
Right. My point is just that from a state funding perspective, it is largely revenue neutral, which was the way that the EV fee in 260 was designed. So if our forecast is completely off, the composition of the revenues is different. More of it will be fuel tax and fees, and less of it will be EV registration fees, but it's still going to be roughly the same amount of state forecast.
Can I add on to that? Just to answer the question, how is the forecast working? So the forecast is 126,000 EVs on the road for fiscal year 24. We currently have, based on DOR estimates, 125,938 EVs on the road today. Actually, as of May 7th, so there may be. unless you register it with the state.
Find the button. Jeff, thanks so much. I appreciate that. Couple of questions. One is, I assume that so for the MPOs that are launching into updates of our regional transportation plans, that the state will also you'll make some efforts to take the statewide revenue forecasts and using sort of updated program distribution and other assumptions, provide to the MPO sort of the state revenue forecasts for our regional planning processes in some period of time?
Yes, I think, you know, I think at a minimum, what we always do is we always provide the formula program amounts, right? So what's the TAP forecast? You know, what's the CMAQ forecast? I think the piece that we is typically subject to, I'd say, some discussion with between the MPOs and DTD is whether you want to try to arrive at some assumptions for other programs that don't have formula distributions. And so I think that's, I think as we get further along, I think that's probably a discussion we would have. But I think as in the past, I think what we've generally been able to do in the past is if the MPOs determine, for example, that they want to make some assumptions about how much of surface treatment, which doesn't have a formula distribution, how much of surface treatment do we think is going to go to this region or that we can work to make some of those additional assumptions to meet planning needs.
Okay. And then your statement, Jeff, about sort of July-ish timeframe of making some determinations or assumptions about the allocation of the state forecast to sort of maintenance and operations versus being available for capital investments. I appreciate that. I would hope that it's a bit of an iterative process during the course of the development of the statewide plan and the regional transportation plan, simply because part of the purpose of PD 14 is to set out some high-level goals and policies for outcomes that the state wishes to achieve through its statewide plan. And it would be unfortunate, I think, to get too locked into some revenue allocation long-term prior to finding out sort of what the outcomes might be through the statewide planning effort of different decisions. So will, in fact, those initial sort of allocation assumptions be able to be refined as the statewide plan and as the regional transportation plans are actually developed?
And I think the answer to that is probably yes. I say probably for a couple of reasons. One is because, you know, I think there's a question of level of detail at which we even do this. So, for example, I think at different points in the past, we've, for example, looked at asset management as a total in the forecast rather than getting into, well, how much of it is going to go to surface treatment. And so I think some of those things may not affect the forecast because we just don't take the forecast to that level of granularity. I think what we will probably do when we come back in July, similar to what we've done here, is we will kind of come back with a baseline that has some basic assumptions. And then I think we'll, you know, we'll take feedback, we'll answer questions. And then I think if we determine there's some additional things that we need to look at, I think we can certainly do that. So ultimately one of the primary purposes, if not the primary purpose for the long range revenue projection, is to support the planning process. So I think a lot of timing comes down to sort of what is needed when, right? So at a certain point in time, we're going to have to settle on some assumptions because we're, for example, need to have constraint for the 10-year plan. But the short answer to your question, Ron, is that I think we will come back with sort of a starting point, and then we can determine there whether whether we need to look at more granular level of detail for planning purposes or make any adjustments.
I don't know this matters, but from an inflationary standpoint, I think that's probably the key slide for me, is from a spending power standpoint, that it's actually diminishing for the state and has been for decades, and we're not keeping up. Is the inflation that's being considered here just a general economic inflation?
Yes. This is just a
slide 46.
General inflation. So this is not sort of sector specific inflation. This is, I think, general CPI over the course of time at about 2.45%. So And I was trying to find that. One thing that I think is important to note on that, I'm always accused of, being a downer. But one thing that I'd like to point out that is maybe a positive aspect that doesn't get picked up on a slide like this is that you don't go in the other direction. So the chart doesn't go off to the left. And so what I mean by that is while while you're right, you're seeing declining purchasing power over time. The reality is there's been a lot of things that have happened in the last few years that brought us up to that over $2 billion level that you're not seeing. So we've, if you were to look at the other side, you'd see us, a pretty substantial run up to where we're at in fiscal year 25 that wouldn't have been there, for example, when we did the 2045 forecast or the 2030 forecast.
And I guess I would argue that the cost of road and bridge construction inflation is actually well exceeds what the general economy sees, especially in the mountain areas and remote areas that are needing the road construction in the state of Colorado. So I don't know if that could be incorporated as well, but I think it would be more realistic than what this shows.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair point. I think also though there's a lot in our forecast that is not directly road and bridge construction, which is why we use a general inflationary forecast. So a lot of our dollars are pass-through dollars going into to transit or maintenance and operations dollars. So that's why we use a general inflationary forecast. But point taken.
Thank you.
So just to wrap up the conversation, I just have a couple of other slides and then we'll move on. The TC will take action or is proposed to take action this month on the final formula programs. Whatever the outcome of that is, we will provide I think it's a note from you, Jeff, the actual allocations for FY25 with the two recommendations for RPP, as I had noted in my note. Ahead of commission, that must have been 3 weeks ago. So the commission will debate those at the workshop and then at the meeting. This is I think we showed this before. This is the general high level timeline. Again, the goal is to have the actual planning document done by August of 2023. And to have a new version of the 10-year plan for those, basically focusing on those out years. So beyond the current 4-year prioritized program that we're in currently ahead of the start of fiscal year 27. So we're looking at the end of next year for that. And as I had mentioned previously, we do have a high level schedule of activities, but we want to make sure that the planning process works for you and takes into account your specific needs and how your region works on there. So, and that will be the first setup with the TPR chair meeting later this summer, and can continue to have the conversations on some of the stuff we have here. And then just some of the other items that we had discussed previously. So, wanted to see if there's any last questions before we move on to the next. With your permission, Chair, I can move on to RPA. All right. As we, first off, I want to apologize for the last minute change on the RPA formula. So after kind of reviewing this and some of the discussions that we had previously with the boundary change and trying to wait for that to go through, knowing that that's not going to happen before the start of the fiscal year, and how we operate and manage TPRs, where it's slightly different from what you had saw on there. And one of the biggest changes is going to be a increase in the allocation of rural planning assistance funds from the state planning and research fund pool from about 152,000 to 200,000 per year. The distribution formula that we're proposing is just to take a fresh look at it. Want your input, because this goes to help pay for some of the administrative activities that are done here And when we know that there's more asks being done for a lot of our TPR administrators. So what we didn't want to do is necessarily, without having those conversations and take a look on those new uses, is to necessarily take away funds from any of the TPRs, with one minor exception that we'll get into in just a second, and it will become clear on there. So that's the change on here, but want to get your input on here, knowing that I know that's not a lot of time before the start of the fiscal year, but hopefully we can take a look at least the first stab at this, knowing it's kind of not changed in a long time. And with the additional fund, be able to take care of the additional activities that folks are being asked to do for our rural planning assistance. If I can. Well, maybe we're not going to talk about it today. All right. We can get through this fairly quickly. Aaron, if you could go to the next slide. Okay. Just as a refresh, I think the TPR administrator meeting was fairly good, trying to outline some of the items. We had robust conversations on some of the high level pieces. We did talk about this topic in particular, knowing that it was probably a longer conversation. We need more time, and there'll be another one, and I think we'll make some changes based on some of the input, so that way folks can have a more collaborative process with that, with the administrators. Next slide, please. Okay, there's the key takeaways. Again, so that slide did not change from previously. Next slide. Next slide. So just how the program works, it's not a federal program. This is a state program, but it is using the state planning and research dollars. We allocated $152,400 in fiscal year 24. The state planning and research generally goes to the Division of Transportation Development, which has most of the activities that are allowable under the state planning and research program. And from that, we give a certain amount to rural planning assistant grants. Next slide, please. This was the funding amounts that was allocated for FY24. Again, the formula has been kind of a precedent, and it's loosely based on distance from headquarters, because a lot of this was for travel to come here. Previously, before COVID, I don't think there was much use of Zoom or Google Meet or whatever we had, and there was a lot of meetings here or at the previous building. And it also took into account the level of responsibility, knowing that there's more travel for the STAC chair and vice chair, not only to this meeting, but also the Transportation Commission as well. And it hasn't been significantly increased since 2015, at least the records that I could find. Next slide. And these are kind of the goals that were laid out in here, is to kind of have a quantitative formula so we can know what to expect, no matter the amount on there, and to make sure that we cover the activities that the state is asking for folks to use. So that's why one of the changes that is changed from the packet is to increase from 152,000 to 200,000, starting with FY25, and put in place a formula for allocating those. Next slide. And so this is the proposed draft formula, loosely based on what we have previously, but to kind of put things into perspective with the where funds are going. Basically allocating around 51% with a minimum base of 8,000 for TPR, an additional 2,000 for TPR with tribal nations, which we have one. Another 39% based on the distance from CDOT headquarters, assuming most of the travel is to CDOT headquarters if need be, and then an additional allocation for the additional travel, for that is for the STAC chair and vice chair, particularly with the TC meetings. And so you can kind of see where those funds lay out on there from the 2,000. Next slide, please. 200,000. I said 2,000. It's 200,000. So these are the allocations on here. So everybody gets a base of 8,000. The addition to for the tribal nations for 2,000, allocation per the distance from headquarters, And then, of course, the allocation for the STAC and vice chair, and I do have a star there that I'll get to in a second. And all these allocations should be higher than what was previously saw from last year. We wanted to make sure that there was no reductions this year based off of a formula funding coming into place. But what we do want to emphasize is that we will revisit this next fiscal year, especially if the funds aren't used, to see where we can allocate those appropriately and make sure that they are used for those activities. But without having those historical expenditures, especially with some of the new activities in place, we just don't have the baseline data to do that. Knowing that we're going to have those TPR administrator meetings to kind of have a soft reset. So that's the change that we have on there. Now, I'll note for the STAC chair and vice chair, the reason why those aren't fully allocated is because there isn't a STAC chair and vice chair election in October. So we will give the first 4 months to Gunnison Valley for the chair, the first 4 months of the vice chair to the Northwest, and then the remainder of funds will go to whoever is elected chair and vice chair for them to cover their travel costs for the Transportation Commission. So whoever that would be, if it is Gunnison Valley again, then the remainder of those funds will go to Gunnison Valley. So I think it's about 12,000-ish remaining. So with that is our proposed allocation for each of the TPRs. Wanted to see if there's any concerns, any questions about this allocation, knowing that we want to try to get these funds out to you quickly so you can start using them with the next fiscal year. But the other caveat is, of course, with any state planning and research funds, all of them have to be approved by the FHWA Colorado division, as with all of the 17 million that we get for that. So in addition from this 200,000 and the 820,000 that we're making available for other activities to the MPOs, the state is increasing the proportion of activities for planning by over $1 million. If we get to the point where we find out that this isn't enough to cover some of the activities that we have described, knowing that some of the questions that we had last time was, well, it does not necessarily cover everything that we necessarily do, but want to make sure that we cover our travel, make sure we cover the things that we're being asked to do. We can have those conversations if we have funds available in the SPR pool. So, but hopefully this will be enough, and we'll see how that works throughout the fiscal year. Any questions? All right. Oh, yes, Ron.
I just, not a question. I just wanted to say thank you for the updated proposal. I think it generally makes some sense. You could slice and dice this a million different ways and take into consideration lots of different factors. I think this is at least a straightforward way to approach this, kind of get a couple years under our belt, figure out how this goes. I will say Dr. Cog, I think, has generally charged to this, not underspent, which I think we're trying to get better at. I think we historically have not charged to this grant program as much as we could have or should have in the past. And I think we're taking it seriously to be more accountable for that aspect, given the kind of large area in the western part of Dr. Cog that is a rural TPR area as well, and the support that we provide to them that we actually, Bill House should cover his ears, probably should have been charged more directly to this rather than some of our other funding sources.
Commissioner.
I would echo those sentiments. This is a good place to start. Appreciate the thoughtfulness behind this. I think, it kind of starts moving that needle. I would echo the comments that Dr. Cott hasn't been accurately charged probably for our cost, right? Because I know what Weld County pays towards the administration of the upper and such, but this is a great place to start. So appreciate your efforts.
Thank you, Commissioner. And thank you, Ron.
And I'll say that if we don't use it, we'll probably lose it. So we need to all make sure that we're actually using it, because I don't think this is going to be you're going to get this chunk of money if you're not spending it. So start spending.
Okay. So the next steps with this is course, the actual purchasing document and a note from myself and Marissa, the multimodal planning branch manager, saying this is the amount you should get. You should be getting your PO. I don't know when we do this, Kathleen. Okay, so we'll do it quickly. But sometime before July 1, we will have that ready for you. Okay, thank you.
Do we need a motion to approve the recommendation? It showed it as an action item. That's.
Sure.
I'll move STAC approve the recommendation.
Second. Second. Move second, is it further discussion? It's been moved and seconded to approve the Planning Region Assistance Grant Program format. Further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? A motion carries.
The next item, Chair, I believe is mine as well, and I would like to, I think it's an item we've already talked about, multimodal options fund, and would like to turn it over to Michael Snow to kind of go into the details with that, knowing that that formula program, which was the recommendation that we worked on, did get approved by commission last month, and we want to kind of quickly move forward. Now, knowing that there was no boundary changes, we will assume current status quo for fiscal year 25. Any projects that have been awarded for fiscal year 25 or has been awarded as part of this process will go forward and will not change if there is a boundary change in November. That will affect projects going forward after that fact, but we can revisit this in fiscal year 26. And with that, Michael, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Darius. So you can move on to the next slide there, Aaron. Thanks. Let's see if it's working again. No. No, it's not usually. There we go. Okay, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time because everybody's aware of the TC's adoption of the updates to both the match reduction and distribution formulas, but I will touch on them real quick. Just to clarify, a couple of points in there in case there's still outstanding questions, and then we'll get on to the more meeting topics, including the impact and what that means, what the zero fare program means to the program, and your current resulting allocations and preparations for project selections. So the match reduction formula did not see any actual formula changes. All that is the same. It relies on the same four criteria. The only thing that was updated was the actual data, the years of data to a more current year. And that did, of course, impact a few towns and counties. So in your packet materials, I've shared with you a PDF listing of the towns and counties required match requirements. Those new match levels are applicable to all subsequent awards of MMF funds. They do not affect any TPRs or MPOs who have already made awards of future years funds. Those were done based on an expected match level, and it doesn't affect those. So it's basically just your future decisions. And then the statutes always permit the commission to consider individual project level match reductions. So the same process as we've done before. If an applicant is requesting a reduction to the match rate that's required in the resolution, they can request that of the TPR or MPO. And if you, as a body, decide that that is in your best interest, you can forward that to us and we'll present it to the TC for approval. But the key here, because it often gets confused, there is no means for an entity to get their match rate reduced. It is a project level and reduction, and they have to do that for each project they propose to get an award for. The distribution formula, however, having also been updated with more recent years' data, which affects all those distribution allocation percentages, the urban formula did see a slight change in the formula criteria weighting. So that had some changes, and we'll look at those real quickly. The TC's resolution does acknowledge that the STAC requested and STAC staff concurred with, and that was to return a portion of our unspent MMOF administrative set aside, return that to the pool to be distributed and awarded. And then we would assume to resume some percentage of set aside of each year's annual local MMOF funding. And currently we're planning to do that at a 2% level. Of course, we can adjust that as necessary or if necessary based on the costs and the drawdown of those funds. Something key in this new allocation and the TC's resolution, all the previous allocations of funds have been based on a very set amount of funding that were being allocated to the TPRs. So when we started this program back in 2020, we had one-time transfer of general funds, and we allocated those in the first resolution back then. In 2022, the resolution allocated a very set amount of ARPA stimulus funding and the state funds from surplus state funds that were from FY21. So what's different in this resolution is it looks and feels now more like other ongoing programs that we program funds to, and that is that we have projections of future years, and we work to decide where those funds are going to go. And that means the same for the MMF program. So now that we have annual retail fees and general funds expected to come to the program, the resolution now says, basically indicates that TPRs and MPOs now have those future years to award to projects, even though we don't have the funds yet. We can award those now and adjust as the actual revenue amounts come in. So I think this is a positive development in what is a new program that we've all been learning to do. We've talked before, and when I spoke to you last month, I talked about the fact that MMWF funds are really slow to get out the door and get spent. And we know what that looks like. It looks like to some who may not understand how difficult it is to program funds and what it takes to get actual projects delivered. We just, if you just look at the expenditures, it's very low and it's very slow, and that may not look good. It looks like, well, maybe MMWF doesn't need that much funding. And I can't say that didn't play into our legislature saying, well, MMWF funds aren't getting spent, and especially stimulus funds. So maybe we need to find a use for it. And I know that was part of the conversation when the zero fare transit idea started to come about. So in the future, I think we'll see MMOF getting programmed early to projects, which means we can decide now which projects those funds, future years funds are going to go to, and we'll be having projects ready to go, and they'll spend them more readily. So our utilization will improve. So here's our adopted resolution formula. And again, the changes are to the data we're using, but also slight changes in the urban criteria formula. So there's no change to the 81%, 19% split between the urban and rural, and no changes on the rural formula. The urban formula modifications were what the STAC had recommended, and that is to slightly reduce the vehicles, transit, jobs, and school age criteria in order to bring in some of the balance over to the disabled and population over 65 criteria. And here's the resulting allocations. We don't need to talk about this at all today, but there are some changes, and So you have that in your packet materials, including the year's allocations projected based on these new allocations. All right, so let's talk about zero fare transit. We did so earlier today, but want to clarify something in case there was any question. Senate Bill 32 explicitly drew the 10 million for that program from the local MMF portion. In other words, 85% goes to the local program and 15 to CDOT to program into statewide initiatives. But this commitment of 10 million is strictly from the local MMF only. The other thing is that should that zero fare program not spend the funds by the end of calendar year 2026, any remaining balance will come back to the local MMF pool and we'll reallocate that. So the good news, well, I mean, that's bad news, right? We do lose 10 million of where we decide our local MMF funds go. However, it doesn't affect and doesn't reduce the projected amounts that I've provided to you in the years past. And I wanted to explain why. There's several factors playing into that. So the first off, I mentioned that we're returning some admin MMF set aside. We're returning 3 million to the pool. So that is gonna automatically reduce that $10 million impact. However, the other factor is that Senate Bill 260's original projection of retail delivery fees was considerably lower than what those retail fee revenues have actually come in. So every update to the projected retail fees has been growing gradually. Every quarter it goes up a little bit. So you can look at how those numbers change. If you look at the first two lines in the graph here, the original projections were that the local program would see about 5.5 million in FY24. That's now up to 6.4. So we're getting a little bit of improvement to reduce the impact from that zero fare program. So then the third factor is that when we looked at and provide future projections to you for your local MMF funds, we were looking at the year that those funds would become available, as in available to spend, right? So when we projected or when we allocated, let's say, surplus state revenues to the TPRs and MPOs back in 2022, those were actually FY21 funds, but they didn't transfer to MMOF until FY23. So we called them FY23. And then we gave you projections of FY24 funds, which would have been the first year of the retail delivery fees. But retail delivery fees actually started being collected on July 1 of 2022. That is FY23 funds. And we showed that to you in the projections as FY24. So if you can picture now what's happening, we are now we're advancing the entire projection year for you by 1 year. Why? Because FY24 projections originally were actually FY23 funds. And those are the TPRs and MPOs who have done any awarding of future funds. When you are awarding FY24 funds, they're actually 23 and so on. So the result here is that your new projections are not actually reduced, even though $10 million has going to the zero fare transit. So all this means is it's not as great of an impact to the awards you've already done. It does mean the $10 million goes to zero fare. So I hope that makes sense to everybody. Any questions about that?
So MMLF has been reduced by $10 million.
Yes, no question about that. It's just that if your TPR has made decisions to award FY24 funds in the past, those awardees aren't really going to be impacted because there are actually 23 funds that have gone to zero fare transit. Now what used to look like 25 funds or 24 and so forth. Good. All right. So, I mean, my big concern is, how does this program impact any, awardees that, are expecting the funds? And there shouldn't be. Ron.
I don't want to beat a dead horse. We had a long conversation about this earlier in the meeting, and I think we all made our perspectives known. And I appreciate, certainly it is a silver lining that for those of us that have made allocations of MOF funds or are about to, that at least the money we allocated isn't being cut into. But we all know that there's $10 million that would have been available for local allocation through the MMOF program that is no longer available for allocation through the local MMOF program. So it's a happy accident that the original revenue forecasts were lower than what the actual receipts have been. Right. Thank goodness, because if that wasn't the case, then we would have been in a more significant world hurt. But I appreciate the attempt at the positive spin.
I mean, this is purely just our programming, right? The response is, now what? Now that we've lost 10 million to zero fare, well, there's less for you to have to address in that other than the policy front of it. And I'm not here to talk about the policy front because you guys talked about that. Okay, thanks.
One other thing, sorry to cut you off, but and Vince brought it up earlier. There are many transit agencies that have zero fare opportunities in the state of Colorado. And how does this impact them? But yeah, just a good question.
Great. All right, so I'm sorry, I heard something. Okay. All right, so this just shows you where that all comes from, and the future, now the new projections and how we figure those numbers out. So FY24, when we originally told you it was 5.5, it's going to be closer to 6.3, almost 6.4, and that's the actual makeup of the new projections that you're provided. And you will see that the admin set aside, we expect to start drawing out that 2% set aside again in the FY26 funds and how that plays out. Again, we'll adjust that as necessary. All right. And there's the projections. Again, we don't have to talk about this, but you've seen it in your materials. And Commissioner Beatty did get it corrected so that it's adding up all the years in the list. Yeah, sorry to confuse everybody. When I talked to the Eastern TPR, we had the wrong numbers in the total. Okay. So we talked somewhat about the needs and expectations, really statutory expectations about using public funds and the necessary requirement to award them in a competitive fashion. So just had some conversation points about preparing for your future project award decisions and some suggestions that might help the TPR prepare. And that is when I'm specifically, I'm talking about the requirement to have a competitive award selection, which in our statutes and in the guidance, fiscal guidance, requires that there be criteria by which you compare competing projects and that your award selections are based on those criteria. TPRs are not in the practice of making calls for projects and evaluating in some fashion and making selections that way. So we want to support you as necessary. And some of the suggestions that we have are that you handle it as we do a lot of our grant programs, and that is we identify the criteria by which we would compare projects and come up with some type of objective and quantitative score that you might provide on that. So we have some materials that we'll share with the TPRs and MPOs when we visit with you, but we're encouraging you to have a process and the discussion about how you want to make your project selections, and free to use the materials we provide for you or help us understand how to support you do it in the way that each of your regions think is best suited. And as always, as we've said before, CDOT's teams are going to be providing review of your applications, the draft applications. So please work with your planning staff when you schedule those out so that there's adequate time to permit that review and get the feedback to your applicants. So, and this is just a quick overview of what we're going to be providing to support you. The program guides that we have published now will get updated in the next couple of weeks, as well as the application forms. And we're going to also schedule in July and August some webinars for applicants to attend. And we'll get those recorded as well so that they're available for anybody that can't make them. We'll let you know when we get those dates scheduled. And then I mentioned a couple tools. One is the application, which you've used before. We've updated it somewhat to provide a little more information that we think will be helpful for those selections. And we also have some suggested scoring methods and tools to support that as needed. All right. Any questions about that? We're getting scheduled, or we're looking at the calendar for when all the TPRs are meeting, and just ask you to communicate with us. We're looking ahead at your schedule, but please let us know when, or if you have preferences about when we get out to your meetings to talk about the MMF program. And that would be just to do a basic overview of the program and help you prepare for your project selections. So with that, I can bow out if there's no questions.
Just a comment, and maybe I should keep my mouth shut on this one, but maybe a correction on the Lake County population. Maybe it's a typo.
Oh, in the MMOF?
Yeah, I don't think there's 55,673 that live in Lake County. So maybe look at that population.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure that's not accurate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. I'll take a look. Thanks for pointing that out.
No problem.
Yeah.
I just saw it.
You said it was 55,000?
Well, that's what it shows. It says Lake County has 55,673, and I think it's probably around 7 or 9,000.
Okay.
Well, we will correct.
Yeah, I'll get that corrected.
And if you don't, it's okay. Just
Yeah. No, yeah, I'll check that out. And even if it's incorrect in the formula, it's unlikely to actually have an effect on those match rates, because a match rate is not based on population.
Yeah.
So I'll let you know if it does
accuracy is
play out.
important, though. Thank you.
I hope I haven't made a major issue, but hopefully it was a pasting issue. And
You're
not
right.
actual formula problem. Okay, thanks for
Michael.
that. Okay.
Okay. Vince, you ready to go then for Region 3?
Yeah.
Okay. While this is getting pulled up, I appreciate the opportunity to visit with STAC, a little bit about Region 3. My RTD has been traveling a lot lately, so he asked me to go ahead and present to you guys today. He gave a great presentation in April commission, so this is going to be following that. I'll grab the mic here as soon as it's pulled up. I have a lot more faith in the computer than I do in the clicker, and I'm going to be going through these slides fairly quickly. I know there's a lot of slides here, but I'm going to focus in on just a few that's going to, I think, a little bit more impactful to STAC members and planning. So the Region 3 this is kind of just the overview, our staffing was just basic what we're going to be doing on our outline. Region 3 really strives for excellence in a lot of things. And so we use this line of concept. And so our safety, our teamwork, our respect, integrity, values, excellence, and service. Of course I do that, so maybe I should. Good. So we are the largest region in the state, 15 counties, 706 bridges, 13 mountain passes, 7 tunnels, and 13 rest areas. One of the things that we like to look at and this was shown for commission, is our
program accomplishments over the year. The XPI looks at this expenditure project index. What our goal is to hit a perfect one, showing that we actually try to spend the dollars that we project over time. And so we really came very close in 2023 with a 1.02, and year to date right now we're at a 1.04. What matters to really, I think, in the planning world is our current project workload. We have 32 projects design, 35 miscellaneous projects, new local projects initiated. Our local project program has grown significantly along with other regions in the state. And I will, you'll see another slide on that later. So we're broken into 3 different programming areas, and these slides just kind of show the design and construction projects in those. In each program area, I'm going to highlight one of the projects that they worked on and were able to complete. About a year ago, we had another emergency issue come up along 133 between Paonia between basically Paonia and Carbondale. The culvert washed out. You can see pictures there of the culvert that washed out with significant spring runoff. We had a temporary bridge. We had detour end shortly after, but then we got a temporary bridge open June 19th and then successfully completed the repairs by October 2023. For our program central area, again, design construction. Their project to talk about is Colorado 13 Rio Blanco Hill. This was a huge safety project that we were working on. Some crashes along this area. The safety improvements included shoulders and passing lanes northbound, and then a chain up area for freight. We did get some freight dollars on that, and then wildlife underpasses to help reduce the wildlife vehicle collisions. So, and then the program east, our mobility project, I-70 exit 203 to 205. We had some traffic at times backing up between the interchanges, and so we added an additional third lane, and those benefits included separating the vehicles and allowing more deceleration lane for the exits. So those were the positive projects that we were able to work on in the last year. And I want to I need to breathe. I always have to write on my slides to take a deep breath. But this is one of the more interesting ones that I have not seen, and I talked to our traffic department a little bit. This is the little nugget really that I wanted to talk to STAC about. So our traffic and safety engineering hired a consultant group with artificial intelligence who's doing artificial intelligence for some safety studies. We hear about artificial intelligence a lot in the news, but this is one of the more positive things I've seen come out. One of the things is it looks at the near misses, the red light running, the vehicle speeds, turning movements. You can see on there what it looks at. And so the street you're looking at here, or the diagram, it's 2 one-ways that actually come together. They're in Grand Junction. And so this just picked up on these conflicts and these points of interest. What's nice is it's not, when we look at safety issues, a lot of times in the past, we've been looking at crash data. Crash data is typically 1 to 2 years behind when we're actually seeing some things. So when we have a community come and they say, well, this is a dangerous intersection, this is things going on, we've kind of got to wait for the crash data to really look at what's going on in these areas. With these AI cameras now, we can get this data back much faster. And so we've done a couple of these, and now this doesn't really work, but this is just a clip of the screen. You can actually go in and click on these to see what the conflicts were and what's going on. So we can get this back in a lot quicker time frame and really see, okay, is this a perceived hazard? Is this, is there something going on? And potentially, what can we do? What are some of the proposed treatments on these? So I thought this was very interesting. Visiting with our traffic unit, there is a lot more they can provide. And so anyway, definitely for Region 3 and others, we're going to look into this a little bit more. So again, we're very appreciative of the Transportation Commission. As you know, last year with redistribution funding, they provided culverts with a lot more money. It was about $65 million. And so we went and we took this funding and we were able to program and look at about 45 culverts that need to be done. And one of these, you think, okay, all culverts and on and on. And one of the first things I learned at CDOT when I was traveling around with maintenance folks, anytime you see a reflector that has 3 dots, that's a culvert there by the road. And it doesn't take long when you're traveling down the road to see a culvert or to see a reflector with 3 dots. I mean, they are all over, as you saw on the map there. But you can see that not 45 culverts, it's like, oh, it's a lot of culverts. But one culvert in particular crosses 4 lanes there in Montrose, and it's like a $10 million fix. It's underwater most of the time, or not underwater, but there's water flowing through it most of the time. It's going to be a big fix. And so, we look at this and we looked at the culverts that really we felt were the ones that were the high priority. Again, our maintenance 2 sections, we have section 2 and section 6. There's information in there that you can see that what they've done over the last year. But I do want to highlight the work that they do. It's tough work. It's work that is not, you can't do it remotely. You have to be there on the scene. And we're still very dependent at times on these guys. And I think everybody here in the room recognizes that. The budget, the public wants A+ levels, and we do the best as far as funding them. But John Lorme does a great presentation for maintenance and what they do. And I took a lot of these slides and information out of there. The housing improvement has been great that the governor has done. Appreciate that. There's housing stipends and on, so we can get these maintenance workers to be about 30 minutes from their patrol area, which is what we require. And again, with the knowledge staff, we're as retirements are coming up and as those with experience are retiring, we're having that experience gap a little bit. And I think all local agencies, cities and counties are seeing the same thing. Again, with the Mustang and Outrider, we do still see demand. You'll see some holes there where the Western Slope are, but we do see demand there between Grand Junction to Montrose and Montrose to Gunnison, and also Grand Junction to Craig. The rail is getting a lot of big news, and we're looking again to start some stakeholder engagements and continue to grow look at the rail in the Northwest. Again, and I talked a little bit about the local agency program. It has grown. I've been doing local agencies projects for the 20 years I've been CDOT. And again, we have grown incredibly over just the last few years. In 2019, we had 16 programmed projects at about $10 million. And now just in this year, fiscal year, we have over 52 programmed projects totaling over $50 million. And this does not include grants, a couple of grants that were received, well, one by the city of Delta and one by the city of Glenwood Springs. These are all impactful. CDOT still works to help these out and helps make sure they follow the process and procedures. So we had to expand there, but just showing that information there. And then last but not least, Region 3 continues to focus on wildlife safety and safety for the traveling public. We have several projects and prioritizations that we look at. And now as our engineers go out, they really look at the topography of the roadway when they're doing their design. If there's areas that you can do a cut or a fill or whatever, then you can have a culvert that's an easy fit sometimes. You just can't drop these wildlife passages just anywhere. You have to get a lot of landowner participation with DOW. So again, a lot of effort goes into these mitigations, these wildlife mitigations and wildlife passages. So that pretty much covers what I wanted to address at this level. Is there any questions from here or from the internet? Thanks.
Questions, comments?
Thanks so much.
I didn't have time to raise my hand, but I just want to say Mark Rogers does a great job for us. So thank you, Mark.
Okay, other business. Scheduling and logistics for in-person STAC meetings.
So,
Darius.
thank you, Mr. Chair. With the time that we have left, and I do not want to take up a bunch of time and allow people to get on the road, knowing we had some very good conversations, and I do appreciate all the input on all of the items on here. But as we discussed last time, because we're in the planning process, I believe STAC had mentioned that more in-person meetings would be requested, and we're happy to facilitate that, and we can use our headquarters building. However, there was also a request to have spread the fun around the state, so to speak. And so we have a proposal here to kind of help us with some logistics, knowing that we've tried to do some different location. It didn't work out this time. We want to make sure that we have the in-person location, but also that's large enough to accommodate everybody, but also for the audiovisual technology, so that way folks that cannot attend in person still can attend. So thank you. We can skip over that. That's just basically that. So this is a tentative proposed schedule, and wanted to see for the rest of the calendar year if this makes sense from a STAC perspective, if we want to do that. So taking a look at somewhere along the Front Range that is not Denver, whether it's North Front Range or Pueblo, we do have a lot of larger conference rooms at our regional headquarters that we can accommodate people, whether it's North Front Range or Pueblo. Take a look in August on something not more on the western slope before it gets bad for weather. And September return to the Front Range in the location we didn't have. And then in October, if STAC wants, we can do an in-person meeting. If not, we can kind of go forward on there if the weather is bad. So want to see what I see Heather's hands already up. So wanted to see if there's any input on this proposed schedule. Heather.
So I've been here a really long time, and I can assure you, as much as this seems like a great idea, which I did not bring up, I mean, I think we went around and around many years ago, many moons and many times on changing venues, figuring this out. I think it's a wonderful thought. As shown today, we do not have in-person meetings, and if we do this, fine. I'm gonna probably vote for whatever you guys want, but I will say that when we had this discussion, I think 2 years ago, we came to pass of May, October, in person, it works, let's do that. As important as we all thought that this meeting today would be to have us all here, no one came. So I love the fact that you all did this, and I appreciate that, but I will move that we stay with our May, October in-person meetings and go back to Zoom. I don't believe that this juice is worth the squeeze in as much as doing a July, August, September in-person meeting. I don't think you're going to have people drive, not even centrally, but now further for some and closer for others. Let's call it what it is and realize that Zoom works. And if there is something super imperative, then it is the purview of STAC and anyone in STAC to say, I want to make this in person, let's do it. And we can do it if we have enough time in advance to do that. But realistically speaking, I don't think this is worth the squeeze.
Is that a motion? Okay. Yeah, I can. Dana, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know if I started this conversation, so I apologize if I did. I agree with Heather. I think that the twice a year meetings is probably enough unless there's like specific criteria that like we agree upon. And I think the funding stuff made sense because there was a lot more discussion. A lot of these are more briefings, which I think is easier to, in some ways, to do it on Zoom. And doesn't maybe necessarily warrant the time to travel out to CDOT for what is mostly a briefing on different topics. So yeah, I would just agree that, you know, keeping them to twice a year at the headquarters is fine, or in the Denver area. And we'll try to make it, you know, as we can.
I would say the only part of that is if we're only doing two, I really feel like everybody should be here. I mean, it's like, this is it. It's twice a year. We all know we have a lot of money to spend now, so we should be able to get here and make the effort to spend the night. The only thing I would say is, please God, increase the hotel stipend, because you can't find one for under $200.
Right, right. Like 400 almost.
I want to say also, I think that like with the long range plan, just thinking from that point of view, I think is going to be outreach, you know, to everybody in different areas. So it's not that like people's input you know, is not being taken for the long range plan. It's not just in STAC where these things are done. So that's why I think it's maybe not a reason to have in-person meetings around.
Gary.
Yeah, I think just during the long range plan, I don't think we need to do monthly. But during the planning process, I think it's good for the TPRs to be in person a little more frequent than just twice a year during the plan. That's partly how we share statewide perspectives. I know we can do it in Zoom, but I don't know, during the planning, I'm not against the Zooms. And traveling around the state, I think that just gets too tough for everybody. You move it to one side, you're gonna lose the other side of the state. So staying more central, I think, although it sounds great to get everybody to come to other parts of the state, it makes it more difficult for meetings. So I'm up for the pleasure of the group and would just encourage, I think, a little more frequent during the planning process, maybe quarterly instead of. And I know the weather for the mountains especially, it can be more of an issue, but I don't have a good solid recommendation.
So if I could add, Mr. Chair, it sounds like somewhere between keeping our current schedule or perhaps quarterly, if there is a need for it, knowing that we have weather concerns in the winter, keeping it at headquarters, because the next slide is, well, let's talk about 25 because we want to be fair to other areas, because we did include, can we find somewhere on the eastern in the eastern plains to, yeah, so we can kind of keep the current schedule, and if STAC wants to meet more frequently, we can. I think my recommendation is before the plans are finalized is instead of having October, looking at something more frequent there, but that's next year. And we can use our current headquarters for the October meeting unless STAC chooses otherwise. So happy to do so. But I will say that from staff's perspective, we will travel out and have those conversations with you and work with our regional partners on there so that we can have those in-person conversations, and it won't just be at STAC, as Dana said, where we have the developing the regional plans that should all feed into the long range plan as well. Yeah, I think this is at the discretion of the chair. So unless the chair, you want to change what the folks have said.
I'm thinking that since it looks like we're reverting to our original schedule. Yes. Okay, so then if that's the case, we don't need a motion.
We don't.
So what we're saying here is July, August, and September will be virtual.
Correct.
And then October is in person.
Correct.
In here.
Right here.
Okay, let's do that.
Sounds good. We will do that. Next meeting will be July 11th. The meeting schedule would have fell on July 4th, but I don't think anybody wants to meet at that day. So
July 11th.
All right.
Anything, that doesn't look like anything's coming here because everybody's leaving. Okay, so I'll declare the STAC meeting for the month of June adjourned. I should check my calendar to see where I am. Nothing about. Yeah, that works. Oh. Yeah, okay.